Hey guys, tonight we wander into the hazy warmth of a world where smoke curls out of clay ovens, where the Nile still shimmers with dawn mist, and where bakers are already up before you even think about snoozing the alarm. You're there, sandals dusty, eyes gritty, dragging yourself through the early morning hum of ancient Egypt's riverbank villages. The air smells of ash, wet grain, and a faint tang of fermenting dough. You probably won't survive this, because if you were really there, a single whiff of that smoky oven could scorch your lungs in seconds, and your soft, modern hands wouldn't last 5 minutes on those grinding stones. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with your location and what time it is where you are right now. I love seeing how this journey circles the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And if you're new here, welcome to Sleepless Historian, your bedtime history channel. Tonight's episode is The Enigmatic Rituals of Ancient Egyptian Bread Bakers. You push forward into the village courtyard where the ovens roar. The sky is barely pale, yet the bakers have already been at it for hours. Their beehive-shaped clay ovens glow like little suns. Each oven is lined with flat stones, blackened by years of flame, yet glowing faint red when the fire licks higher. It's loud, crackling wood, the slap of dough against stones, the chatter of workers trading gossip. You can't help but notice that bread here isn't just breakfast. It's life, currency, offering, and ritual rolled into one crusty package. One mainstream fact: bread was literally the backbone of Egyptian diet. Most people ate it with nearly every meal. Archaeologists even joke that Egypt wasn't so much a civilization of pyramids as a civilization of bakeries. Every grain harvest, every tithe, every ration for workers revolved around bread. But there's also the quirky stuff. Bakers sometimes tossed crocodile dung into the fire pits, believing the foul smoke would ward off insects and evil spirits. Sure, it probably worked as pest control, but imagine kneeling over your breakfast thinking, hints of reptile dung in this crust. Bon appetit. Historians still argue whether these dawn baking rituals were purely practical or also staged as religious theater. Was bread just daily fuel, or was every loaf a miniature offering rehearsed for the gods? As you stand there in the heat, the lines blur. The workers sing in cadence, not just to keep their grinding in rhythm, but also to honor the divine cycle of rebirth. You watch a young apprentice run past, carrying a woven basket stacked with raw dough. His arms tremble under the weight, and he shoots you a look that says, "Move or you'll get knocked flat." You step aside, the earth underfoot warm from yesterday's ash, still holding heat like a natural underfloor oven. Even the ground here seems alive with baking energy. The women hum softly while kneading. Their bracelets clink as their fists punch the dough again and again, a rhythm like a heartbeat. They pause occasionally, smearing flour streaks across sweaty brows, muttering little incantations half under their breath. You're not sure if they're counting, praying, or complaining about sore wrists, but it adds to the atmosphere of mystery. Then you notice the hierarchy. One baker, clearly older, stands by the ovens, inspecting loaves like a general reviewing troops. He doesn't need, he commands. His voice cuts sharp through the smoke, scolding, praising, adjusting the fire. It's obvious, bread here isn't just kitchen work, it's military discipline. And the stakes? Feeding priests, nobles, and even the gods. The first loaves are pulled out, scorched on the edges, dense and heavy. You'd need the jaw of a crocodile to chew through them. Some are destined for the temple nearby, others for the local workers, and a lucky few will land on the tables of wealthy scribes who expect their bread light and white, not dark and grainy. Even at this early hour, bread already defines who eats like a noble and who eats like a field laborer. The smell grows intoxicating, nutty, earthy, smoky. Your stomach grumbles, though you suspect one bite of this ancient bread might feel like chewing gravel. Archaeologists have analyzed ancient loaves and found them full of sand, chaff, and tiny bits of stone from the grinding process. Imagine your dentist's horror. A boy runs in from the river, carrying clay jars sloshing with water. The bakers dip their hands to cool them, then pour a splash on the oven stones, sending up steam like dragon breath. The hiss makes you flinch, but the bakers barely notice. It's part of the morning's orchestra. You realize something unsettling. Bread here is survival, but it's also sacred performance. Each act, from fetching water to patting dough, is layered with meaning, watched by neighbors, by priests, and supposedly by gods. And you, standing sweaty and dazed in the smoke, start to feel like you're part of an ancient ritual you never rehearsed for. As the sun peaks over the Nile, the ovens glow brighter. Villagers shuffle in, holding baskets to collect their rations. The chatter rises, complaints about taxes, gossip about a fisherman's sick wife, rumors of crocodiles further upriver. Yet the bread keeps coming like clockwork, loaf after loaf, hot, steaming, heavy with history. And as you wipe soot from your eyes, you wonder, is this just breakfast or the heartbeat of an empire? You step away from the oven's orange mouth and into the cool shadow of the granary court, and your hands move before your brain catches up, scooping a palmful of kernels that click softly like tiny beads. You cradle them the way you'd hold a handful of gold dust, because here they almost are, sacred grains, khorasan and emmer, and barley mix like a quiet constellation in your skin. A priest with a shaved head watches from under a linen hood, eyes narrowed, as if the gods themselves deputize him to make sure not a single kernel escapes your sweaty grip. You roll one seed between finger and thumb. It's smooth, then faintly ridged, a bit like your conscience when you remember the crocodile dung smoke you inhaled 15 minutes ago and decide not to think about it too hard. The granary breathes with a dry, dusty calm. Mud brick walls are scored with old palm ribs, doors sealed with clay impressions stamped by scarab signets. A scribe leans over a wooden tablet, tallying baskets, reed stylus scraping in neat columns. Mainstream fact, coming at you like a soft lecture in the shade. Emmer, wheat, and barley are the backbone of Egyptian bread making, the staff of life measured in baskets, in rations, in temple dues. The river's flood sets the schedule, the Nilometer's markings, Those careful steps cut into stone forecast how much grain gets lifted, taxed, and tucked away. It's not only food, it's salary, savings account, and social contract in husk form. A line forms at the milling area, and your body joins it without asking. You kneel at a saddle quern, just a low stone and a handstone, but it might as well be a full-body workout class. You push forward, pull back, forward, back, and the rasp of stone on stone becomes its own meditation. The priest murmurs a blessing to Renenutet, the cobra-crowned goddess of nourishment, and someone rings a sistrum once, a bright insect-like trill that makes the dust shimmer in your ears. The movement sets a rhythm your shoulders copy, the way your footsteps match the oven crews earlier. You are a metronome with elbows. The quirky bit slides in like a cat in the granary, because there is, in fact, a cat in the granary, and it wears a tiny braided collar. It slinks along the sacks like a furry security guard, receiving the kind of reverence modern supervisors only dream about. People leave tidbits for it, touch its head for luck, and whisper that a granary cat carries Bastet's watchful eye. If you're wondering whether there's a formal policy, there is. Don't mess with the cat. Joke 1. You consider applying for the cat's job. The benefits look fantastic, and the dress code is sleek. You sift your crushed grain through a woven basket, letting the coarse chaff drift off on a lazy breeze. The dust coats your lips with a taste like dry paper and new coin. Grit gets everywhere, between teeth, under nails, into the creases of your sandals. That's not just you being clumsy. Archaeologists have found ancient loaves full of sand and tiny rock fragments from exactly this process. Bread isn't refined yet. It's honest. Your molars twinge at the thought, and you make a mental note to invent floss a few millennia early. Joke 2. You weigh the odds of pitching papyrus floss to the priest. He is not a seed of disruption kind of guy. The priest circles back, lays a palm on the milling stone, and whispers a brief invocation to Osiris. In certain festivals, yes, the corn mummies you may have heard about, the Egyptians sprout grain in mold-shaped beds as offerings, a symbolic rebirth that echoes green shoots pushing up through silt. You picture those tiny shoots, pale and earnest, like a chorus of "We got this" from the underworld. And you get why a handful of grain feels like more than calories. It's a portable resurrection spell, a promise you can bake and share. Now your hands move to the pounding area. 2 workers lift long wooden pestles and bring them down into a jar, a deep thump that you feel in your shins. Someone starts a chant to keep time, nothing fancy, just breath and syllables, and you join in because it's easier than thinking. Historians still argue whether the priestly presence here is about strict control, temple surveillance over every sack, or about sacred stewardship, a kind of ritual guardianship of abundance. Maybe it's both. Maybe in a world where flood and famine are one uncertain season apart, you don't separate holiness from logistics. You watch as a basket of larger kernels, people call it Khorasan in whispers, like the word itself is a relic, gets set aside for special loaves. The rumor, the bedtime story-level romance, is that this big buttery grain is the pharaoh's wheat. Truth check. Egypt's daily grind is emmer and barley. The lavish myth of a single royal wheat lineage is more marketing than census report. But the mystique clings, and there's a reason you can't resist cupping it close. The fat kernels catch the light, promise a silkier crumb, a richer chew, a loaf worthy of an offering bowl. You carry your milled meal toward the sieves again, and a young girl with a braid as straight as an ibis feather steps in to help. She shakes the basket with a rhythm you already know from the ovens. Steady, economical, patient. Dust blooms, then settles like pale snow. The priest nods when he sees your consistent texture. The scribe scratches another figure on his tablet. The granary is bureaucracy scented with straw and warmed by sunlight. A paperwork dream, if your paperwork came with cats and blessings. Joke 3. You nearly stamp your own forehead with a clay seal just to fit in. The priest coughs in a way that means, please don't. Mainstream fact number 2, sliding into your ears with a sleepy lilt. Temple granaries function as state engines. Grain goes in as tax, emerges as wages, especially for workers attached to royal projects, and moves again as offerings to ensure divine favor. The cycles map to the Nile's pulse: inundation, emergence, harvest. Everyone knows the steps. The priest just makes sure you hit them on cue. You look at the clay ceilings stacked near the door, each impressed with symbols that say who owns what. They are the locks in a world before iron keys. The quirky fringe whispers from a corner where a basket sits tucked under a reed mat. Someone has stashed a handful of seeds wrapped in linen and tied with a tiny knot spell, a charm against theft and rot. You don't touch it. You've learned your lesson about sacred workplace objects. But the idea lingers that grain can remember prayers, can carry luck through the oven and into a stomach, and from there into a day that goes a little easier. Superstition, you say. But then you hum the milling chant under your breath again, because why risk it? A runner bursts in from the river path, sun flashing on his shoulders. He reports the flood marks read favorably, enough to promise plump heads this season, not so much that the dikes will fail. The scribe grins, the priest smiles in that restrained priest way, and the whole granary exhales. You feel the collective relief, the way a family relaxes when payday is definite. You scoop one last bowl of meal into a sack, tie it with a twist of palm fiber, and pass it along the human chain toward the mixing court, where wet hands and murmured recipes will take over. Before you leave the shade, you press your palm against the cool mud brick and notice tiny fingerprints fossilized in the plaster, maybe from the boy who helped patch the wall last year. His life, like the grain, is counted in baskets and songs, in seasons and seals. You swipe your gritty forehead with the back of your wrist and step out into the sun again, dust haloing you like a miller's crown you neither earned nor asked for. Behind you, the priest adjusts a jar lid. The cat curls into a loaf shape, ironic foreshadowing, and the scribe's stylus keeps its soft scrape. Ahead of you, the chant at the querns fades into the hush of water jars and the quiet magic of what happens when crushed seed meets time, patience, and a little divine supervision. You rub the flour grit from your palms, stepping into another open courtyard where the air vibrates with a strange pulse. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. It takes you a moment to realize you've wandered into the grinding circle, where rows of kneeling workers bow and rock like human pendulums, their arms guiding heavy handstones across flat querns. The sound is hypnotic, stone rasping grain, voices humming in steady chorus, dust rising in pale clouds that glitter in sunlight. You settle into the rhythm almost without choice, your breath sinking to the scrape. If you came here looking for a gym membership, congratulations. You've just signed up for the original CrossFit class, with sand as your protein powder and no showers included. Each worker presses forward, then draws back, torso swaying. The grindstones squeak, and kernels fracture into coarse meal. Your shoulders ache just watching. Archaeologists point out the obvious. This labor carved arthritis into the bones of countless Egyptians, even children pressed into service, their spines bent and knees worn before adulthood. That's the mainstream fact. Bread wasn't free. It was ground out of bone and sweat. And you feel guilty complaining about your keyboard wrist pain after seeing this. The rhythm isn't just practical, though. Someone begins a chant, a low melody, words slipping like water, fragments invoking Hathor, calling for strength, or maybe just joking about who's spilling the most grain. It spreads, weaving through the workers until the grinding becomes percussion under a human choir. Historians still argue whether these chants were simply morale boosts, ancient work songs, or whether every verse carried ritual weight, summoning divine blessing with every pass of stone over seed. Either way, the monotony transforms into something strangely sacred, a pulse that steadies your breathing as though you've joined a drum circle older than memory. You notice one worker grinning as she sprinkles a pinch of crushed coriander onto her quern, purely to perfume the air. That's your quirky tidbit of the hour. Egyptians sometimes flavored their bread dough with herbs like coriander, fenugreek, or caraway, but occasionally they scented the milling dust itself just to make a brutal job more bearable. You lean closer, catch a faint peppery whiff, and suddenly the whole courtyard feels less like a labor camp and more like a kitchen improvising aromatherapy. The heat grows. Sunlight pushes across the courtyard, scattering dust motes like gold flakes. Your skin prickles, your nose stings, and still the grinding doesn't stop. A boy stumbles, his handstone slipping with a dull thud. The overseer barks something sharp. The chant wobbles, then reforms, stronger, as if the group refuses to let fatigue break the spell. You kneel instinctively, place your hands on the cool, rough surface of a spare quern, and push forward. The resistance shocks you. The grain doesn't yield easily. It fights back. Muscles in your arms tighten, your knees dig into gravel, your spine protests. Yet after a few strokes, the rhythm grabs you. Forward, back, forward, back. You are one more stone in the human machine. Around the edges of the circle, jars of water sit ready, guarded like treasure. Workers pause only briefly, wetting their lips, splashing their faces, then resuming. No one dares drink deeply. Too much water in the belly drags the rhythm down, and every eye seems to flick toward the priest who lingers nearby, his shaved scalp glinting. He holds a sistrum and shakes it occasionally, not to scold, but to remind them the gods are listening. The vibration rattles your bones, the metal discs jingling like laughter and warning all at once. You think about the repetition, hours, days, years of it, knees on stone, lungs full of dust, arms aching. And yet here is the paradox. You also sense pride. Bread feeds workers, priests, nobles, gods. Without this grinding, pyramids would stall, temples would empty, children would starve. These kneeling figures aren't just cogs, they're lifelines. The chant shifts, swells, and you realize they know it too. The grind isn't just survival, it's identity. And then humor finds you in the dust. A woman beside you nudges her partner, teasing him for letting a pebble slip through. Crunchy bread again, she laughs, rolling her eyes. Joke number 1. You imagine ancient Yelp reviews. 3 stars, too much sand, would not chew again. You wipe sweat from your brow and the grain dust sticks, leaving chalky streaks like war paint. For a second you catch your reflection in a copper mirror leaned against the wall, and you look like some strange bread warrior, armed with dough instead of swords, flour instead of shields. Joke number 2. You half expect Marvel to announce the incredible baker in hieroglyphic font. The chant grows louder, almost jubilant, when suddenly the sistrum stops. Silence drops heavy. The priest raises a hand, murmurs a blessing, and everyone halts mid-motion. It's a pause, not for rest, but for ritual. He sprinkles a few kernels into the air, murmurs a line invoking Osiris, and the crowd echoes. Grain dust catches sunlight, drifting down like golden snow. For a heartbeat you swear time itself slows, as though even the Nile holds its breath. Then, with a nod, the rhythm resumes. Thump, scrape, like nothing happened. Historians still argue about that pause. Was it about dividing shifts, or was it an ancient liturgy disguised as rest? You can't decide, but the hairs on your arms rise as though you've brushed against something more than dust. Toward the courtyard's edge, a pile of spent querns leans like old bones. Each bears grooves, depressions, scars from years of grinding. Archaeologists note how querns wear out, needing constant replacement, entire quarries dedicated to producing more. You touch one, smooth from decades of palms, and feel the ghost of every worker who pressed forward and back, forward and back. Their lives are fossilized in the very stone. Joke number 3 arrives courtesy of your own throbbing arms. You mutter, "I'd kill for a treadmill desk right now." The woman beside you doesn't understand, but she smirks anyway, as if the punchline somehow crossed time. The day pushes on. Sweat drips, chants rise, and the steady grind carves itself deeper into your ears. You stagger upright, leaving your quern behind, and watch as another kneels instantly to take your place. No break, no gap. The rhythm never falters. Grain dust swirls behind you, clinging to your hair, your eyelashes, your clothes. You cough, but even that falls in time with the chant. You are carried unwillingly but irresistibly into the pulse of Egypt itself. And as you step away, shoulders aching, you realize you're still moving forward and back, as though the grind has crept into your bones. Maybe that's what eternity feels like, an endless rhythm binding stone, grain, and flesh together. You peel away from the grinding circle, lungs still fluttering with dust, and your feet follow the path every baker learns by heart. Down the lane where reeds whisper, past the granary cat pretending not to supervise you, into the cool strip of shade where water jars nap against a mud brick wall. The air changes here. It smells of damp clay, bruised lotus, and that mineral hush that tells you the Nile has brushed this place with its wide, steady hand. Your fingers trail across the rounded bellies of the jars. They sweat delicately, cool to the touch, tiny beads pricking the surface where the clay breathes. Evaporation is doing quiet magic while everyone else argues about flour and fire. A boy presses a gourd cup into your hand. Easy, he says, because the first swallow always surprises you. You sip, and the water arrives cooler than the air by a whisper, tasting of baked earth and clean stone. Mainstream fact tucked inside that chill. People here rely on Nile water drawn from river or canal, settled so the silt sinks, then strained through folded linen and stored in porous clay that chills by slow evaporation. It's ancient physics dressed like kindness. Bread needs fire. Bread also needs this cool whisper. Or else the dough sulks and the starter throws a tantrum that would scare even a crocodile. You cap a jar with folded cloth and lift. The rim is smooth under your palms, the weight leaning into your ribs like a stubborn goat. A priest's assistant taps the clay 3 times with a reed. Talk, talk, talk. Polite knocking at the mouth of the river. Protective habit, he shrugs. Ask Happy to keep the jar pure. Ask the tiny creeping things to mind their own business. Historians still argue whether gestures like these were private superstitions or recognized household rites, the kind of tiny liturgies no one writes down because everyone already knows them. Either way, it sounds like a discreet doorbell between you and the flood. You and 2 others slide a carrying pole under the jar's shoulders and hoist. The pole bows across your collarbones, and you step off, toes crunching through powdery silt. Beyond the bakery yard, a path dips to a shallow wellhead, a seep behind a clay revetment where river water lingers in a patient pool allowed to clarify itself. The reeds rim the edge, dragonflies hover like blue pins stuck in sunlight, and a little shrine sits nearby. Bess with his lion grin, chipped but cheerful, keeping pests, nightmares, and sloppy technique at bay. Someone has tucked a string of shells along his chin. It looks ridiculous and sincere at the same time. The boy kneels and dips a clay scoop just below the surface where the silt lies quiet. He pours through a funnel lined with folded linen, and the stream comes out silvery and thin as thread. Beside him, a woman holds a bowl of natron paste, not for the water, but for the vessels. She scours the jar's interior, swishes, rinses. The alkaline bite leaves the clay smelling faintly of sun-baked desert. Clean jar, cleaner taste. Everyone nods as if this is both blessing and recipe. Because it is. Bad water means sluggish ferment, off smells, and queasy bellies when the day is already long. You remember the ovens and decide this little shrine is the second hearth of the bakery, the cool one. You hitch the fresh jar back onto the pole and rise. The weight wakes muscles you didn't know you owned. Step, breathe. Step, breathe. The jar sloshes a heartbeat behind yours, and each sighing lap against the neck tells you how the day is going. Sweet when the jars are new, earthy after a sandy wind, mineral when the rope rubs the clay just so. The city has its palette of waters, river edge, slow canal, courtyard seep, each with a personality you learn by ear and nose before anyone writes it on a tablet. Joke 1 slips out when you imagine launching a connoisseur's guide, the sommelier of silt, and immediately give yourself 1 star for carrying technique. Inside the forecourt, you nestle the jar into a shallow ring of sand and wedge a fired chip under the base to level it. Whoever threw this pot understands bakers, a lip that pours without dribbling, a shoulder your wet hands can grip, a base that sits like a hippo in mud, content, stable, not inclined to drama when the floor trembles from the oven's breath. You peel the linen cover and hang it to dry on a wooden peg. The master baker glances over, not a full look, just that sideways measure that says the water arrived and you didn't spill your reputation on the ground. There's a second water point under the eaves, a stone basin fed by a narrow runnel that drips, always shaded. Someone's clever donation, probably a noble hoping each cool sip buys him a line in a hymn. Historians still argue whether elites truly enjoyed safer, cleaner water than common folk, or whether careful settling and smart storage leveled the field more than we assume. You look from the shaded basin to your sweating jar and decide the answer is, as usual, it depends which roof you stand under when the wind changes. You ladle water into the bowl where your sourdough starter drowses. The liquid smells faintly of lotus. Someone has slipped a petal into the jar, maybe for beauty, possibly because a grandmother swore it kept water peaceful. Here's your fringe whisper of the hour. Some bakers tuck a sliver of juniper, a palm fiber knot, or a single lotus petal into the jar to encourage a cooperative ferment. Spell, habit, or hedge, no one is sure. Does it change the microbes or just your confidence? Historians still argue whether tiny charms mattered in outcomes or merely softened the nerves of tired hands. Either way, the starter stirs the moment the water kisses it, bubbles twitching like gossip at a market stall. Joke 2 arrives with the apprentice who leans to admire the clarity and dips the tip of his braid straight into the jar. He freezes, eyes wide, then whispers, "It's blessed now." You hand him a cloth, declare him the minor household deity of hydration, and award him one official ladle. He glows. Even the priest's mouth tries not to smile. On a low bench, the scribe unrolls a narrow papyrus and ticks off columns with his reed. Mixing, washing, drinking, oven quenching. Sensible math. Strict, stingy, necessary. Mainstream fact again. Water is rationed like grain. A bakery is a thirsty engine. A few ladles too many, and the kneaders grumble. A few too few, and the dough goes stubborn. The crumb tight and cross. The ovens claim their portion as well. A controlled splash on hot stones gives a hiss of steam that sets crust and keeps the domes from cracking. You've learned to flinch lovingly at that hiss, the way you'd flinch for a friend who startles you daily on purpose. You carry a smaller jar to the kneading floor, pour in a thin line, and the bowl takes the water like a secret. Hands plunge, bracelets clink, and the mixture wakes, the smell of wet grain rising like a warm promise. Someone hums the grinding chant without noticing, and you hum along because your bones remember it. A runner brings yesterday's dregs, cloudy with silt, and pours them onto the packed floor. The dust settles, and the room breathes easier. Nothing is wasted, not when the river demands attention for every mouthful. Later, back on the embankment, boats slide by, reed skiffs, squat ferries, a brewer's barge with baskets of mash piled like hay bales. People wave, and your brain writes joke 3, a boutique stall called Nile and Chill with single-reach river lots and clay sommelier pairings for different crumbs. Before your shoulders, negotiating 80 pounds of pottery, veto the business plan on ergonomic grounds. You pause at the seep and watch silt settle, a slow snowfall underwater. Time unknots. A heron lifts one leg and chooses patience. The boy sings a thread of the work chant. You tap the jar's rim 3 times, more gently now, and feel the tiny sound travel through your fingertips into the water and back into you. Whether it's ritual, schedule marker, or a secret handshake with a god, you keep doing it. Some habits arrive as jokes and stay as anchors. Back at the bakery, the jar leaves a wet ring on the packed floor, a brief moon that fades almost as soon as you notice it. You wipe it with the edge of your linen, lean the jar against the wall, and feel a surprising affection for the dumb, beautiful thing. You whisper, "We're basically co-workers," and when a single bead forms and drops, plop, you take that as a yes. One last thought before the ovens call you. Beer waits in the wings, small and daily, safer than raw river when the season turns feverish. People drink both, water calmed by clay and beer tamed by ferment. Which is better depends on flood, month, and luck. Historians still argue whether most people preferred beer for hygiene or water for convenience. You take another cool sip, square your shoulders, and carry the Nile back into the heat. You lean over the low bench where a squat clay jar waits, banded with soot and thumbprints, warm as a sleeping cat in sun. The linen lid is tied with a plait of palm fiber, and when you lift it carefully, like greeting a moody ant, an aroma rises. Tart green apple, wet grain, a shy whisper of beer. The surface trembles with tiny bubbles, a quiet constellation pulsing under a thin flower skin. Starter of the gods, the elders call it, and you believe them for a second, because nothing else in the bakery looks this alive without making noise. You slip 2 fingers around a wooden stir worn smooth by 100 dawns and give the mixture a slow spiral, clockwise, then counterclockwise, ritual more than recipe, until the bubbles nudge back like patient fish. Here's your mainstream anchor in this bubbling sea. Egyptians leaven bread with fermentation, wild yeasts and friendly bacteria tamed in jars like this one, fed daily with fresh flour and cool water. Archaeologists slice ancient loaves and find gas pockets frozen in time, proof that dough once rose and sighed before the oven fixed it forever. Tomb paintings show kneaders waiting, a detail modern eyes skip until someone points out that waiting is the invisible ingredient. They don't know the word yeast, but they speak its moods fluently. You measure by memory, 2 scoops of finely sieved emmer, 1 sip of that lotus-kissed water you fetched, another swirl. The jar answers with a soft fizz, like a secret being shared. The priest glides near, murmurs the name of Osiris, grain's king and patient corpse, the one who dies and rises, dies and rises, as if he invented bread's magic to prove a point. You tap the jar's rim 3 times. Talk, 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 because your hands remember the well and because the habit steadies you. Historians still argue whether these small gestures actually changed outcomes or simply wrapped fragile processes in meaning so people could breathe while they waited. Either way, the starter seems to stand a bit taller, and you take the compliment. Across the bench sits a twin jar with yesterday's culture, sleepy, a little sour, a grandfather with opinions. You smell it and grimace, too sharp for today, but perfect for the medicinal crumbs the healer wants later. You tie a reed tag around its neck so no one mistakes personalities. Joke 1 bubbles up on its own. You've basically adopted 2 temperamental pets, and unlike the granary cat, they cannot catch mice or pretend to ignore your existence. They require compliments, snacks, and a stable microclimate. 10 out of 10 would not pet sit again. Someone mentions beer, and the room nods in unison. The bakery and brewery flirt across the lane like neighbors trading sugar at sunset. Froth climbs the lip of a brewing vat next door, golden and alive. Some bakers swear by skimming that foam, barm, and whisking it into dough for a bouncy rise. Others cling to the quieter sour of a long-nursed starter like yours. Historians still argue whether Egyptian loaves mostly rose on beer foam, on sourdough, or on a happy marriage of both. The art scenes are suggestive but not conclusive, and ancient recipes forgot to footnote their yeast sources for future nerds. You, practical as a worn sandal, use what smells right and bubbles when you whistle. You draw a fingertip through the surface and watch the track fill with air beads. The texture sits between cream and mudflats at low tide, glossy, elastic. You feed it again, whispering nonsense, because your teacher swears bread hears tone if not vocabulary. A few bakers fuss with charms. An Ujjat eye doodled in slip on the jar's side to ward off the evil eye of sudden drafts. A knotted hair from a lucky day tied to the handle. A crumb of date pressed under the lid to sweeten its temper. There's your quirky tidbit. A good starter gets treated like a household genius loci. Part ingredient, part roommate, part low-maintenance deity you bribe with flour. Do these talismans matter? Maybe only to the person who needs them, which in kitchens is the person who is you. You reshape the lid, tuck it on loose so the gas can escape without sulking, and carry the jar into a patch of temperate shade. Too hot and it sprints, then collapses. Too cold and it sulks, arms folded, refusing to rise for anyone. You judge temperature by your forearm. When the clay kisses your skin and neither steals heat nor gives it, you're in the sweet spot. The scribe pretends not to watch, but he marks the position of the sun on his tablet anyway, building a private map. How long to double under today's sky? How many chants between feedings? How many finger taps to happiness? He won't call it science, but he will brag when it works. Joke 2 blinks into existence when the apprentice leans in and asks what you've named your starter. You say, deadpan, Ra-I-Sen. He groans so loudly the priest looks up, and you accept this as a universal review score of 2 stars for pun quality, 5 for fermentation spirit. Later, he confesses he was going to suggest Do Cirrus, at which point you both agree to keep these ideas under the lid forever. The jar breathes. You sit with it, really sit, because bread requires companionship as much as chemistry. The bakery's noise fades into a blanket of gentle clatter, bracelets tapping bowls, querns sighing in the distance, someone coughing in rhythm with a memory of the grinding chant. You stir at intervals so soft the mixture barely notices. A dome forms, faintly domed as a cat's back just before a stretch. When it reaches the line your teacher scratched inside, an ancient notch under fresh smears, you know the white-cap tide is coming in on time. Mainstream fact folded into your patience like salt into dough. Long fermentation does more than lift. It changes flavor, texture, and digestibility. Lactic bacteria lay down tang and tenderness, and the slow, gassy stretch opens the crumb so a mouth doesn't have to be a grindstone. In a land where sand sneaks into everything, any mercy to teeth is a civic duty. Your jaw thanks you in advance, even though you can still hear the woman from the grinding circle teasing, "Crunchy bread again?" The brewer's boy appears at the door with a shallow bowl of barm, frothy as river foam in a brisk wind. He offers it like a bouquet. You thank him and glance at your jar. Jealous? Not exactly. You keep the barm as plan B, a booster shot if a cool breeze sneaks under the eaves or if the moon decides to be coy. Historians still argue whether moon phases guided bakers in scheduling ferments. Phase calendars show up in other rituals, and plenty of kitchens everywhere swear the moon meddles with dough. You won't swear, but you will peek at the sky and schedule your hopes accordingly. By late afternoon, the starter's dome quivers and sighs, peak reached, edge softening, a sweet spot that lasts longer for no one. You scoop a ladle into the mother dough bowl, hold back a spoonful to feed the jar again, then smear a thin streak of paste on the interior wall as a visual timer. When the smear dries to the color of baked mud, it's time for the next feed. Low-tech, gorgeous, effective. Joke 3 writes itself when you catch your reflection in the jar's shine and mutter, "Influencer tip, moisturize your clay." The jar ignores you, busy inventing tiny pockets of air you will later call crumbs, and someone else will call a reason to wake up tomorrow. Evening leans in, bringing the hush you've come to crave. The heat loosens its grip on your shoulders. Ovens still growl, but the courtyard breathes deeper. You nestle the refreshed jar beside a warmed stone, not too close, and lay the linen back across the mouth. A faint trail of bubbles continues like tiny pilgrims climbing a slope toward a shrine. You wipe the bench with a damp reed sponge, stroke the ujjat the apprentice sketched there in leftover starter, and let yourself imagine that the eye watches your sleep, not to punish, but to keep the culture steady while you dream. Before you rise, you fold a piece of the overripe starter with crushed garlic and a pinch of coriander and set it aside. Tomorrow, someone with a cough will tuck a scrap into hot beer and call it medicine. The Eber's remedies love bread. It soaks up, carries, binds. Food and pharmacy share a shelf here. Your hands smell sour sweet, like green fruit and sun-warmed straw. You whisper thanks, half to microbes, half to Osiris, half to the cat dozing 2 benches away. Math is flexible at this hour. And you carry the mixing ladle to the dough floor where the moonlight will do its quietest work. You do not say goodnight to the starter. You say, see you soon, because the culture does not sleep the way you do. It hums under linen, patient and insistent, a river in a jar. When you step away, you can still hear the tiniest fizz, like far-off rain in reeds. The beehive ovens breathe. The water jar sweats its silver beads, and in your chest, somewhere between tired and satisfied, a second heart keeps time with the starter's rise, already preparing your hands for the night's cool, mixing the way a boatman reads the river before he leaves the shore. You carry the refreshed jar to the kneading floor where moonlight spills in a long, pale ribbon across the packed earth. The beehive ovens are banked and breathing, embers pulsing like sleepy fireflies. The courtyard hush is a lullaby you can knead to. A low trough waits, a half-hollowed plank with flour dust clinging to its sides like frost. You tip your palm against the jar's lip. Let the living culture slide down with a soft sigh, then rain your sieved emmer in a narrow snowfall. The flour darkens where it touches the starter, a tide mark that promises transformation. You add the cool water you coaxed from the seep earlier, just a thin thread at first, and the dough replies with a sticky, satisfied sound, like a cat settling deeper into a nap. Somewhere behind you, the granary cat actually does that, because of course it does. Your hands enter the bowl as if they've been waiting there all day. Fingers rake, fold, press, and the pace catches your wrists, tugs at the hair on your arms, claims you like a friendly swamp. You tip in a pinch of desert salt from a linen bag and feel the whole mass tighten, an invisible corset drawing the structure inward. Mainstream fact: Egyptian bakers mix in large troughs and jars, then knead, sometimes by hand, sometimes by treading, until the dough coheres. Tomb scenes show pairs folding and stretching with a rhythm you can read even in paint, and residue in ancient loaves proves the long, wet mix that makes emmer behave. They don't say gluten, but they court it like a patient suitor who knows when to wait and when to lean in. You lean in, push, fold, turn. The dough slicks your palms, then peels away with strings that glisten silver in the moon. The night breeze drifts through the courtyard, smelling of reeds and smoke, with that faint reptile memory from the crocodile dung fires. Don't think about it, so you angle your body to shield the bowl, and the apprentice fetches the linen screen the way a sailor trims sail. You glance at the notch you carved on the trough's rim earlier, a quiet measure for hydration, and trickle another spoon of water along the edge where the dough won't sulk. Beside you sits a shallow plate of crushed coriander and a whisper of fenugreek. You pinch in a breath of it, and the air blooms, warm, green, slightly sweet. Quirky tidbit: some bakers keep a night spice, nothing heavy, just a pinch of herb or a memory of anise, folded in for offerings or for families who believe dawn bread should smell like fields at first light. You've seen a grandmother kiss the herb bowl and insist the dough listens better afterward. Does it? Tonight, your dough relaxes into your palms, so you let the superstitions stand. The moon climbs a thumb's width, and you fall into the slow cadence that mixing teaches. Scrape, fold, pause, listen. The dough answers back, the soft slap against wood, the glossy breath when you lift and let it fall, the faint squeak when it's just wet enough to resist. then comply. You stretch a flap thin until lamplight blurs through like vellum. It trembles, then holds, and you grin with your mouth shut so the priest won't accuse you of proud thoughts. Joke 1 pushes its way out anyway. You consider carving gluten whisperer into a potsherd for your resume, then imagine the scribe's face and decide to live a quieter life. Turn it, the master says from the shadow, and you turn it. He barely watches. He can hear the dough's grammar from across the court. He'll step in if you miss a verb. You fold again and think about all those painted bakers kneading under sunlight, and here you are doing the same under a friendly moon. Historians still argue whether night mixing aimed to catch cooler temperatures for better fermentation, or whether labor schedules simply stacked grinding by day and mixing by night. Either way, the yeast prefer this hush, and so do your shoulders. Anything that isn't heat feels like mercy. The brewer's boy appears with a bowl of barm, froth like river foam. You test your dough with a wet fingertip and decide the jar's culture is enough. Still, you cut the barm with a ladle and whisper, "For luck," the way you tapped the water jar 3 times, the way you drew the eye of Horus with starter on the bench. Historians still argue whether these gestures, eye symbols, knots, whispers, carry any weight beyond nerves and narrative, but the room feels steadier when your hands remember them. You smear a tiny ujjat on the trough rim with doughy finger, a wink for the night. You add a spoon of date pulp because the order to bake a small batch of sweet loaves is tucked under the scribe's elbow. The fruit dissolves in brown streaks that taste like caramel and river sunlight. Mainstream footnote you can taste. Egyptians bake specialty loaves with dates, honey, and oils for temples, feasts, and the better tables. Lighter flours for nobles, darker barley cakes for many. Festival bread sculpted and spiced when the calendar rings its bells. Your hands know the difference by weight and smell. Sweet doughs pull softer, sigh louder. The apprentice, emboldened, says he can feel the moon tugging the dough like a tide. Joke 2. You promise the moon you'll keep her secrets if she gives you one good bulk rise. She doesn't sign the NDA, but the dough swells anyway. In a corner, your starter, Ra Eisen, may the gods forgive the pun, rests under linen with a gentle fizz. No puns, the apprentice warns, which is what he always says before making one. You stroke the dough's surface smooth, leave it to breathe, and rub the tack off your hands with a scatter of bran. The bran scrubs like sand, but friendlier. Across the floor, 2 women begin treading in a larger jar for the worker's batch, bare feet clean and oiled, stepping and turning as if dancing in place. The thump is soft as a heartbeat. Historians still argue whether those scenes represent kneading dough, blending mash for beer, or both at different times. To your eyes tonight, it is bread becoming itself under the quiet pressure of human bodies, the most ordinary miracle you know. You test your dough with 2 fingers. It springs back, then sighs, proof enough that the culture you fed and sang to is now a chorus inside the mass. You rest the dough under a warm cloth, set a small lamp beside the trough to keep off drafts, and sit back on your heels. The courtyard feels like a ship after oars finally match rhythm. The cat rearranges into that perfect loaf shape again. Remember? and you try not to take it as commentary. The priest circles once, studying the lamp's smoke. He approves of the flame, not for omen, but for airflow. He's learned what the bakers know. A good rise hates stale corners. Joke 3 peeks around the door with a messenger who asks what to call this batch on his tally. You say, without remorse, Ra Eisen Jr. The apprentice groans in a way that could curdle milk, and the messenger writes only night mix on his tablet, which is probably best for the historical record. You return to the trough and give the dough a gentle set of turns, just to remind it of direction. It yields and strengthens, the surface smoothing into the kind of satin that reflects a sliver of lamp flame. You cut off a small piece, pinch in garlic and coriander, and tuck it into a covered bowl for the healer again. Tomorrow's poultice schedule never sleeps. Food and remedy are siblings here, swapping clothes whenever the day requires. When the dough has rounded softly and the dome quivers, you dust a board with flour and divide by feel. No scales, just memory of yesterday's hands. You fold each portion tight, seam down, then up again, and friction seals it. A quick thumbprint here, a tiny slash there, a secret code so you'll know which loaf goes to which mouth. Shapes will come later, scarabs, ankhs, those lucky pyramidal molds. But for now, moon rounds rest like quiet moons of their own. You cover them, breathe through your nose, and step back. The night smells of coriander, river stone, cooling clay, a hint of smoke that keeps insects and old superstitions at bay. Somewhere a heron croaks, and far away a barge chain clinks. You hum the grinding chant under your breath, softer now, and press your palm to the cloth. Warm, alive, patient. The dough swells almost imperceptibly, as if listening. You don't say anything clever. You don't need to. You've already told it everything with your hands. You lift the cloth and find your night rounds softly domed, skin taut as drumheads, and the room leans in to listen. This is the part that makes fingers fidget, shaping. You dust a board with bran, friendlier than sand if still a little judgmental, and slide around onto the surface. Your reed knife glints. The master tilts his chin toward the mold shelf, and you step beneath it like a pilgrim under an archive of small gods. Rows of forms stare back, clay trays impressed with ankhs, beetle-smooth scarabs, little pyramid molds with crisp edges that dare dough to hold its nerve. You choose a scarab first because the granary cat is watching and the universe seems to enjoy a theme. You thumb flour into the mold's corners, then pat it out so nothing clumps. Baked-in lumps are forever, like bad decisions carved in limestone. You press your palm into the dough to degaz, gentle, a lullaby, and nestle it into the beetle's shell. It spreads, hesitates, accepts its new geometry, and you smooth the seam with a wet fingertip. Mainstream fact to anchor your enthusiasm. Egyptians use pottery bread molds in staggering numbers, beja pans for round loaves, conical forms for offerings, even tall tapering molds that stand like miniature obelisks on tomb tables in paint and in clay. Scenes show bakers shaping, stamping, and arranging, a choreography of hands turning paste into symbols everyone can read over incense. You set the scarab on a tray dusted with bran, then reach for an ankh mold. The looped cross is deep, its arms flaring like a bird's wings. You pinch the dough into the bar and pull the loop smooth so it won't tear as it rises. The apprentice hovers, equal parts admiration and nerves. He whispers, "That one for the temple?" "Maybe," the scribe will decide. Some loaves go straight to the offering table. Others fuel scribes and sweepers who keep God's floors dazzling. Historians still argue whether the miniature forms in tomb art reflect literal, edible loaves or stylized icons for categories, bread types as pictograms. You go with the evidence of your fingertips. This ankh dough is very edible and getting puffier by the heartbeat. You mark the batch with a thumbprint pressed at the base of each symbol, a code you and the scribe understand. In the far corner, the treading jar thumps. Your feet remember that pulse even as your hands move with tiny precision. You drag a reed comb across a plain round to make a herringbone texture, half decoration, half practicality. It opens small channels for steam, protects the top from random blistering, and pleases whoever stares at bread the way others stare at jewelry. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Some bakers keep a little pocket kit, comb, shell stamp, reed spoon, not for show but to give everyday loaves a face, a recognizable household identity. You've seen a family burst out laughing when their comb pattern appears first on the rack, as if bread has learned to wave. The master points with his chin again, this time at the tiny pyramids. You choose a triangle of dough, fold its edges inward, and invert it into a sharp little clay form. You tamp the base flat with a quick smack. Bread needs a good stance, and lift the mold away to check corners. The figure sits there like a joke the gods told about architecture. Miniature monument, edible geometry, mainstream follow-up, offering tables and tombs love these tidy shapes, conical stacks, triangular loaves, ridged rounds. Whether every shape had a standard recipe or sometimes just wore a festival costume is another one of those debates the living won't stop having with the dead. The priest arrives at your elbow with quiet feet. He studies your ankhs, then lays a single reed across the tray, a thin shadow line pointing east. "Bake these on the younger fire," he murmurs, meaning the oven that's running slightly cooler after the last load. The symbols should hold, not melt into a generic blob. You nod, grateful. He's learned heat like you've learned dough. Historians still argue whether priests dictated recipe and ritual or merely audited quality and offerings, but no one denies they developed a palate for outcomes. Consider it the oldest kitchen inspection program with the sternest customer reviews. You reach for the stamp board, little discs carved with household emblems, a lotus, a fish, a plow. You press one into a worker's round to mark rations for the pyramid crew, a system as practical as it is pretty. A marked loaf knows where it's going and who owes thanks for it. Joke one arrives when the apprentice suggests a new stamp, a lounging cat, and you point to the actual cat already posing as quality control. "Trademark issues," you whisper. The cat blinks as if to say, "Consult my agent." You take a coil of dough and wrap it into a loop, pinching the join under with that confident little twist that turns chaos into halo. The loop will bake as a ring bread, easy to hang on a peg, easy to carry on a rope. The boy from the brewery peeks in and asks whether he can stamp a barley ear on one of the rings. You hand him the barley stamp, and he presses too hard, leaving a deep crater. You cover it with a clever crosshatch. There, you say, now it's an intentional motif. Joke 2. You add in a stage whisper. We call that chef's salvage, which makes the boy beam because he is now a chef by association. You return to your scarabs and pinch their little heads so they don't balloon into frogs. A light score down the center line gives the shell somewhere to expand. The ankh lobes get a shallow slit along the loop's inner curve to keep the top from tearing. You've learned the language of expansion, like giving breath a door. The priest notices your care and mutters a blessing to keep the evil eye from bursting the symbols open in the oven. Historians still argue whether the evil eye feared in households maps to actual thermal stress, drafts, sudden heat spikes, or whether fear of envy and disorder simply found a convenient metaphor in split bread. You've seen both, a jealous wind and a jealous cousin do similar damage. Someone brings a dish of toasted sesame, rare, precious, saved for a noble's table, and you sprinkle a few seeds in the ankh loop. The nutty scent rises like a rumor and sets the whole bench purring. Not every day earns sesame. Most days, coriander or poppy-like black seeds do the glamour work. You try not to be sentimental about seeds, but your nose has a memory better than your tablet. The sesame says feast. The reed comb says home. And then there's the small superstition you pretend is a technique. You press the tip of a date pit against your own arm, then use that same hand to smooth the dough, as if a kiss of sweetness can persuade structure to behave. Quirky fringe, you tell yourself, and you don't lecture you, because bread is partly nerves, and you are allowed a talisman that hurts no one. The apprentice catches you and smirks. You raise an eyebrow. He chooses to believe it's a sanitary procedure involving aromatherapy. Everyone is happy. You line the trays in order, ankhs closest, scarabs behind, pyramids last because they're the chattiest on a hot floor. The oven crackles, a warm animal rousing. You think of the crocodile dung smoke you tried not to think about. You shovel a pinch of clean chaff instead, and the scent sweetens. Memory is a strong spice. You slide the tray toward the oven mouth, wait for the master's nod, and ease the first ankh onto the stone. Steam kisses your wrists. The cymbal holds, the edges puff, and your chest does a small, undignified swell of relief. As the shapes go in, you keep a few rounds aside for charms. Tiny buns you'll press with the eye of Horus and send to the healer's shelf. Mainstream reminder, bread doubles as medicine here, poultices, binders, carriers for herbs. If a patient needs courage, no one objects to courage baked into a morning roll. Historians still argue whether household charm breads show up in official ledgers or simply disappear into kitchens under the heading miscellaneous kindness. You prefer the ledger that lives in people's breathing. Joke 3 happens all by itself. One of the little pyramids slumps into a pyramid with personality, and the apprentice stage whispers, modern architecture. You call it an experimental form, rotate it to the cooler side, and the angle improves. If only life were so responsive to a quarter turn. You work faster now. Press, dust, stamp, slash, until the bench is a field of symbols laid out like a quiet hymn. You don't think about the temple or the noble or the crew. You think about the way the dough trusts your hands to give it a shape it can survive. You think about the reed comb, the stamp board, the molds fired by some potter who never meets the god his clay will feed. You think about the line you can't name that runs from millstones to mouths, through cymbals and steam, through ankhs that mean life and scarabs that mean a sun pushed up again tomorrow. When the first ankh comes out, you breathe out with it. The loop is intact, the arms defined, the crumbs springing where you gave it room to breathe. You set it on the cooling rack. The cat, that loaf-shaped oracle, refuses to blink unless you offer a crust. You break the tiniest heel, hot, and blow on it. Then let the cat pretend it's doing you a favor by accepting. Everything in the courtyard settles an inch. You dust your hands on your apron, reclaim a pyramid with personality that has decided to behave, and reach for another round. There are more molds waiting, fish for the fisherman's saint's day, lotus for the midsummer feast, and the moon is nowhere near done with you. You press your palm to the next dough as if greeting a friend who knows your secrets and doesn't mind. The symbol you pick this time is simple: a circle with a crosshatch, a net for catching luck. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's everything. Either way, you press gently, lift carefully, and let the dough remember your touch as it rises into the heat where stories set into crust, and the morning will read them without even trying. You crouch at the mouth of the clay dome, and the heat kisses your face like an overeager lion, affectionate, a little dangerous, and not open to negotiation. Sweat springs from your forehead before you even blink. The oven breathes in a low, steady hum, clay glowing the color of ripe apricots under soot. The floor inside is paved with smooth river stones, hand-picked, heat-seasoned, and as moody as any diva you've ever worked with. You slide your palm along the lip. It's warm, sandpapered by years of ash. A pinch of chaff crackles where you toss it in, a small offering so the fire knows you're polite. You follow with the tiniest fleck of kaifi resin from a priest's packet, enough to scent the air, not enough to smoke the dough, and watch a curl of fragrance turn the oven mouth into a shrine. Mainstream fact to steady your pulse: these domed beehive ovens, clay over a frame, sometimes freestanding, sometimes set in pairs, are everywhere in Egyptian bakeries. Archaeologists find them at Deir el-Medina and Amarna, and in dusty corners of townhouses, their floors packed hard by generations of bakers who knew exactly how much fire a loaf could bear. Fuel is a pragmatic bouquet: wood if you've got it, straw and chaff because you always do, and yes, dung when the landscape says trees are a rumor. You've already met the crocodile dung smoke as bug repellent and maybe spirit deterrent. The oven doesn't mind its personality as long as heat stays honest. You rake the embers to the side with an iron-shy tool, a fired clay paddle with a stubborn streak, and test the floor with a sacrificial scrap of dough. It sears, puffs, blisters in seconds. Too hot for those ankhs you shaped, perfect for a quick round for the workers who like their crust loud. You splash a ladle of water, just a hiss, nothing dramatic, and steam billows up, softening the floor's temper. The hiss races up your arms. Your skin feels tighter, like clay finding its kiln. You think of the water jar's 3 taps, talk, 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 and give the oven lip the same. It's not in any manual, it's in your bones. Historians still argue whether Egyptians baked more often on the oven floor, on heated stones, or stuck flatbreads to the inner walls like a tender kiss, letting gravity and speed be their co-bakers. The art shows floor loaves and molds. The ethnography whispers wall slaps too. The debate simmers like a pot no one will take off the fire. Tonight, your stones are your truth. You angle your peel, slide an ankh onto the cleared patch, and feel the dough grip, puff, and relax, as if remembering the shape it promised you back on the bench. Above the mouth, a tiny clay amulet peeks from a seam, a smirking Bess with his lion man grin, ash-dusted and eternally unamused. Quirky tidbit for your apron pocket. Some bakers press a Bess face or an Ujjat eye into the dome while the clay is still damp, a guardian baked into the kiln so the heat stays playful and not vindictive. You slip the first crisped crust to the edge and break off a crumb. A first fruit nobody writes down, but everybody does. You set it on the oven lip for Bez. The granary cat appears 3 heartbeats later to audition for the role of divinity. You negotiate a tiny corner and keep the ritual's spirit, if not its literalness. You work the oven like a conversation. Loaves for younger fire first, the ankhs with sesame rings, the scarabs that need their lines to remain definite. Then the plainer rounds that can take a burst. You rotate each piece with the peel's quick flick, reading the color like a scribe reads ink. A shallow slash opens into a smile. A tight round swells without cracking because you scored where expansion wanted to live. The priest stands back saying nothing, which is, in priest, a standing ovation. The heat drags the air out of your lungs and stuffs it with cinnamon amber shimmer. Your arms shine, eyebrows tingle, and you realize the oven is giving you an unpaid spa treatment. Exfoliation by ash, aromatherapy by compromise. Joke 1. You mentally open a luxury package called Pharaoh Glow, includes free eyebrow singe. The apprentice snorts, then pretends he's coughing to keep his piety card. You remember the pyramid with personality from the last batch and place today's triangles in a cooler arc, just inside the ring where heat licks but doesn't bite. The little peaks hold, edges rounding into something that looks like geometry, softened by kindness. When a draft nudges the flame, you switch stance, body a living windbreak. A baker is also a wall. A baker is also a fan. You are infrastructure with elbows. On the back shelf, a handle-long paddle rests, a turning tool for wall breads when you dare them. You try one for the worker's snack. Slap a thin disc of barley and emmer to the inner curve, the sound a soft thwop. The dough clings, then bubbles, freckles, and lifts at the edges. You slide the paddle under and pry gently. It peels free with a sigh, half blister, half kiss mark. The women at the treading jar cheer softly. This is not a grand loaf, but it's the soul of lunch meant to be torn and dipped. You set it on the rack and watch the steam rise in a little white flag that means ready. Historians still argue whether steam was deliberately managed in these ovens. splashing, mopping, and closing mouths with clay stoppers, or whether the mass of wet dough and the porous dome created all the humidity anyone needed. Your hands vote for both. You splash when the crust threatens to toughen before the crumb is ready. You trust the dome when it hums in that note between kettle and drum. The dome hums now. Your ankhs lift, sesame popping softly like shy applause. Mainstream reminder while your peel whistles in and out. Large-scale bakeries show up linked to temples and palaces, racks, molds by the basket, ovens in pairs or rows, because bread is payroll and piety. The workers' village near royal tombs was practically a carb factory, rations counted in loaves and beer jugs. Over at the temple precinct, offerings pile up in neat stacks, and whatever the gods don't eat becomes staff meals, redistribution with incense. Your benchmarks carry those destinies in their little stamps. Joke 2 announces itself when a lick of flame curls towards your forearm and you yank back with a yelp that sounds suspiciously dignified. Congratulations, the master says without smiling. You have been accepted as a son of the oven. You glance at your singed arm hair and mutter that you'd prefer adoption by a cool cellar. The oven, unmoved, asks for the next loaf. Between loads, you swab the floor with a damp reed mop, quick strokes that smell like hot river rock and patience. The hiss reminds you of the water jar's quiet sweat and the way you tapped its rim. You tap the paddle twice to settle your own breath. Even the rhythm is heat management. In, out, wait, breathe, turn. Your hands develop a map of hot and hotter, a blind person's reading of fire. You start to know where a loaf will blister and cut it off at the pass with a quarter turn. The priest watches the oven mouth the way sailors watch a horizon. If the dome goes dull, he has wood. If the flame snarls, he has a story for it. You slide in the scarabs and watch their backs rise like sunrise over Beetle Hills. A shallow center score opens into a fine seam, the cymbal staying crisp. You hold your breath until the first one finishes its stretch and settles. You know that posture. It's the same way you sit after a long knead, taller but calm. You pull the tray and rack them. The cat does a casual drive-by, as if counting inventory for the gods. Quirky Fringe arrives with the master's little jar of fire oil, not to soak loaves, but a tiny dab on the peel's edge, a slick that keeps sticky dough from sulking at liftoff. It's scented with coriander and a susurrus of something bitter, maybe fenugreek, maybe just pride. He dots the peel like anointing and hands it back to you, as if passing a baton in a relay everyone starts at dawn and never really finishes. You roll your wrists and re-enter the sun in a clay shell. Joke 3 climbs out of your mouth when you shout to the apprentice, preheat to 350, 100 years of practice. And he groans so hard the dome nearly collapses from secondhand embarrassment. You deserve it. You also deserve the next breath of crust scent, nutty, faintly sweet, with that whisper of smokiness that says civilization tastes like this. A few malformed rounds, victims of enthusiasm, get sliced open for sampling. You knock the bottoms and listen for the hollow talk that means the crumb is set. The sound takes you back to tapping the water jar, to tapping the oven lip, to tapping your own ribs now and then, to check that you are here, warm, doing a small thing well in a world that asks for pyramids, but runs on bread. You tear off a heel, too hot, juggling it from palm to palm, and blow. The crumb glistens, the sesame sings, the coriander you folded in earlier whispers hello from the background, like a friend who doesn't need attention to be present. By the time the last pyramid stands at attention and the final ankh cools enough to stop sighing, the dome's glow has eased from apricot to old clay. You bank the embers with respect, like tucking a child who might wake and run if you don't convince it to dream. The master slides a flat stone across the mouth to keep out the jealous wind. You stack trays too high, reed racks creaking. The priest nods toward the gate, where incense threads up from beyond the courtyard wall. You hoist the first tray. Heat lingers on the loaves like an afterthought of sun. Your shoulders square, your grip adjusts to the dance you learned carrying water, and the scent follows you. Smoke, sesame, sweet grain, a procession that turns heads long before anyone sees symbols. Somewhere past the ovens, the temple breathes its own perfumes. You aim your feet between the two breaths and step into the lane, carrying a morning the way a bark carries light. You shoulder the first tray and drift into the lane, where the heat from the ovens trades places with a cooler breath rolling out from the temple wall. Incense threads the air, sweet, resinous, a little wine-like, as if the stone itself is exhaling. Your loaves, ankhs, scarabs, a tidy squad of pyramids that decided to behave, make their own weather, a warm tide of sesame and grain following you like polite ghosts. The granary cat escorts you to the gate and then pretends you don't exist, which is how you know you're doing it right. The temple pylon looms, its sloped sides painted once upon a time in colors that would knock your sandals off if the sun hadn't already done that. Flags whisper at the tips of tall masts, linen tails pointing whichever way the gods feel theatrical this morning. At the threshold, you pause because everyone pauses, not a stop sign kind of pause, more like the breath you take before you call someone you love by name. A Wab priest stands in linen so fresh it squeaks, skin oiled, scalp shaved smooth enough to pass as a polished pebble. He tips the fly whisk in one hand, ceremonial, practical, both, and gestures you in. Mainstream anchor tucked under the perfume. Temples feed the gods every day. The daily rites swing like a door on well-oiled hinges. Dress the statue, light the incense, present bread and beer, meat and greens, little dishes whose names taste like hymns. Iconography doesn't lie about this part. Bread and beer are the first citizens of the offering table. The very sign for offering, the Hotep sign, is a loaf on a mat, a permanent reminder that peace and plenty look like a simple curve of baked grain. You carry that curve with both hands, and the air feels different when you cross into the forecourt, as if the sandstone remembers every loaf anyone ever set down here. The incense today runs to Kai-Fi, night-brewed perfume, wine and honey, and raisins and myrrh, beaten to a chant until the pace learns the rhythm. Quirky tidbit with both feet in real practice. People say Kai-Fi is pounded with sung lists of ingredients as if each note were an ingredient itself, and that it makes sleep kinder when it burns at dusk. Sleepy baker that you are, you salute the perfumers internally. And then try not to look too eager to nap on the cool paving stones. The offering tables live in an in-between space, just outside the inner rooms, just inside the bustle, stone tops smoothed by centuries of elbows and God's lunches. You slide your tray in among others, lotus loaves, comb-marked rounds, tall cones that look like cheerful hats, and line up the ankhs so their loops face the sanctum. The priest murmurs the names of deities, a rhythm you recognize from the grinding circle. Only now the drum is your own ribs. He sprinkles water, natron-kissed, clean as a promise, over the table edges and onto your wrists. Your skin prickles, not from cold, but from being included in the sentence. Historians still argue whether the laity pressed this close every day or whether most stood back in the forecourt, handing their offerings to temple staff like you, watching from that respectful threshold while the inner business got done. Some days the gate feels loose and neighborly. Other days it hums with "not past this point," and today lands softly in the middle. You and a few others move like furniture the priests have grown used to and might even miss if you vanished. A scribe tallies as if the gods will cross-check his math later. He notes the stamps on the worker rounds, barley ear, plow, because offerings don't just vanish into the statue's smile. After the rite, what the god has eaten becomes staff rations, distribution with incense on it, the economy humming under the liturgy. Mainstream reminder, half practical, half poetry. Egypt runs on this loop, grain to bread, bread to altar, altar to mouths that keep the altar clean. You notice the way sound behaves here. Outside, work clatters. Inside, voices land on stone and lie down like obedient dogs. The priest taps a sistrum once, the bronze tongues giggling, and the loaf-shaped silence rearranges itself to make room. Your ankhs seem to stand taller, sesame blinking like little eyes. You steady a pyramid that feels chatty and nudge it into stillness with one fingertip. Like telling a toddler the story will start soon if they stop narrating the room. Joke 1 arrives on schedule when a fly stages a dramatic landing on an especially photogenic scarab, and the fly whisk performs a rescue operation with priestly grace. You whisper thanks on behalf of the loaf, which is an unusual sentence, but not the strangest one you've said today. The priest hides a smile in his linen and gives the whisk an extra flourish as if to say, "Tell no one, but this is my favorite part." Beyond the offering tables, a doorway breathes cool shadow and perfume air. You won't go inside. Today you're a shoreline, not a deep swimmer, but you can imagine the ritual as it unfolds. Doors unsealed, bolts slid, the statue unveiled and greeted, morning cosmetics for the god who never technically slept. Bread arrives like punctuation, first sentence, not afterthought, and beer follows, small and plenty. Historians still argue whether gods consumed the essence of food in metaphysical bite size before humans ate the leftovers, or whether the ritual honestly pretended nothing more mysterious than a dignified lunch happened. Either way, the bread does double duty, one bite for eternity, many bites for the staff who keep eternity dusted. A junior priest pads over, points to your ankhs, and orders 2 set aside, lightly warmed later, for a specific rite with a sick child's amulet. Bread will touch the amulet and borrow its story. The family will take the loaf home and break it as medicine for courage. You make the mark with a reed and slide the pair to a shaded corner. Bread is a citizen. Bread also moonlights as a courier. A cluster of pilgrims edges the gate, women in bright linen, a man with a reed case, a child who stares at your pyramid loaves as if they might sing. The doorkeeper folds his arms, the bureaucratic stance of every era, and then softens when he sees small baskets held right, offerings tied with string like well-behaved parcels. One woman has shaped her loaves with a lotus press. You recognize the pattern and feel an absurd bump of pride, as if the bread itself were your cousin. Joke, too, peeks out when the child whispers, "Do the gods prefer sesame?" And without thinking, you whisper back, "They respect good taste." The doorkeeper coughs in a way that says, "Children's theology is adorable, but please keep the line moving." The scribe checks the sun, its height against the pylon edge, and nods. Everything runs by light here, flood by nilometer, ferment by shadow, offering by the sun's finger on stone. You find your tray lighter by 2 ankhs and 1 scarab, and heavier by the attention the priests pay you now that they trust your slashes hold. A priest leans toward your ear and murmurs approval of the crumb you can't yet see. For a second, you feel wildly, inappropriately proud that a god's lunch will spring well under the crust. Quirky fringe tucked into a corner where rules bend into habit. A small dish of crumbs sits beside the incense burner, and a novice priest flicks a pinch into the coals with a secretive snap. He says nothing, but the smell that rises, tiny, sweet, like bakery breath turning into prayer, feels like the edible version of a bell. Absolute theology? Maybe not. Personal insurance policy? Definitely. The cat, who has absolutely not followed you in here, materializes anyway and pretends the crumbs have always belonged to her. You surrender 1 in the name of interfaith relations. Joke 3 lands when the senior priest lifts an eyebrow at your scarab lineup and asks, perfectly dry, "And do they roll the sun properly?" You answer with equal dryness, "Only uphill," and he gives you that priestly look that splits the difference between scolding and laughing. Then he turns away to speak names into the doorway, and the air shifts again as the inner doors reconsider their secrets. When the rite releases its breath, the tables loosen. The scribe waves staff over. Redistribution begins. Your marked worker rounds find their way into baskets bound for the far end of town, where men and women who will never see the god's face in stone will taste the morning's worship anyway. You lift your empty tray and it feels like relief and also like a question. Do you go back for more or stand here for one more heartbeat and pretend the cool under your feet is a blessing meant just for you? One more heartbeat. You choose one more. The incense tastes faintly of raisins. Somewhere a hymn curls around a column and sits down with its back against the stone, content. You adjust the linen over your forearms where the bread trays left warm marks, and the priest touches your sleeve once. The lightest good work in a language of gestures older than your grandmother's favorite superstition. Outside again, the forecourt sun finds you. The smell of the ovens rides the breeze like a messenger pointing you back. The cat reappears in full daylight, extremely not following anyone, and escorts you to the lane's edge before deciding you've passed your test. You stack the tray under your arm, roll your shoulders, and head for the glow where another rack will be ready. The gods have eaten. So will the city. Your feet know the way between the two. You turn off the temple lane and into a courtyard that speaks in linen and shadow. Cool water trickling in a jar, palm fronds whispering, servants drifting like quiet birds. A steward fingers the cord around your bread baskets as if measuring status by weight. He takes your ankhs first, of course he does. Then the pale rounds you sifted to near white, flour like moonlight, crust that crackles when you press a thumb. Your feet cross polished flagstones that have never met a quern's dust, and the air smells not of ovens, but of lotus, myrrh, and roasted goose. You exhale and remember to keep your shoulders level. Baker's pride is useful. Baker's swagger gets you shown the door. A noble woman sits beneath a painted arbor, her wig a disciplined river of black. Musicians pluck and sing, and a servant with a fan keeps the afternoon polite. The bread table gleams, a parade of pale loaves, plump cones, stamped rounds so evenly combed they look carved, mainstream fact sliding in like a respectful bow. Status in Egypt tastes, very literally, whiter. Fine sieved emmer gives pale flour that bakes into soft, airy loaves prized by elites, while most people chew darker, denser barley breads and coarser emmer cakes that carry more bran and, yes, more grit. Tomb scenes love to show the pale stuff. Ration lists love to show the rest. You set a white round on a tray of honey and fresh cheese. Its crumb springs back like a polite nod. The steward pinches a corner and tests it the way priests test incense. Eyes a little unfocused, head tilted, a private ceremony of approval. He gestures you onward to the server line, where bread joins roasted duck, figs, cucumbers, and beer. Always beer, plus wine if the host is feeling grand. You remember the ankhs that fed a god an hour ago, and here they are again, loops gleaming with sesame, about to feed conversation and decision. Bread sits in both rooms without needing to change clothes. A row of girls in linen pour water over guests' hands into bowls, the little rivers catching gold bracelets in flash after flash. You watch a guest tear a pale heel, dip it in honey, and float for a second as his eyes close. The bite is quiet. No stones, no sand, no work in it beyond the long labor you left behind in the bakery. Joke 1. You whisper to your apprentice, "Welcome to the VIP carb lane," and he nearly swallows a laugh with his tongue. Musicians notch the rhythm up. A dancer glides. Someone lifts a lotus to their nose and inhales as if flowers contain courage. Quirky tidbit, scented and debated for centuries. Guests at banquets sometimes wear cones of perfumed wax on their heads, melting slowly to release fragrance over the evening. People once thought they were pure art invention. Then excavations coughed up actual waxy cones, perfume frozen in archaeology, suggesting the paintings were, at least sometimes, literal. Whether or not the cone ever slid down anyone's forehead mid-toast is a detail you decide not to test today. You hover near the servers, cutting clean slices from a tall cone loaf that holds its shape like a good promise. A scribe leans close, murmurs that the governor favors the ultra-fine, sifted twice through linen, chaff banished, bran hardly a rumor. Your wrists remember the work of that sifting, the ash-scented sieves, the way flour fell like dry rain. Historians still argue whether white bread in art always means literal whiteness or sometimes a symbolic shorthand for best, and whether common households ever tasted such fineness outside of festivals. You state your opinion with a knife. The cone loaf is pale enough to make the moon jealous, and it eats like silk. The steward nods for the sweet breads. You bring date-filled coils, aniseed rounds whose scent reads like bedtime for grown-ups, little sesame-sprinkled moons that want to be devoured while stories climb the walls. Mainstream note: festival pastries and enriched breads, sweetened with dates, honey, sometimes drizzled with oil, show up in offerings and in elite meals, while ordinary tables meet simpler loaves most days. You hold back a grin when a child at the edge of the party nicks a date coil and vanishes under a chair like a tiny jackal god of dessert. In a pause between songs, gossip rises: land, taxes, a new barge, a neighbor's garden that somehow irrigates itself better than everyone else's. Bread moves the talk along like a gentle oar. You tear open a white unk to check the crumb, habit, not suspicion, and the steward doesn't scold. He watches, interested, as steam ghosts upward with the perfume of coriander you folded in last night. Soft, he says. You say nothing, but your shoulders remember the grinding circle and stand a little taller. A servant arrives with a platter of darker rounds for staff. You clock the difference without thinking. Thicker crust, rougher crumb, honest bran, sturdy enough to grab and keep its shape in a laboring hand. You've baked both. You've eaten both. You've watched workers soak the dark rounds in beer to soften them, making a fortifying mash that tastes like effort and bedtime. Joke 2 shows up uninvited when you imagine a lifestyle scroll titled Ancient Keto and immediately toss it into the Nile for the crocodiles to fact-check. A runner slips in from the street, dust on his shins. He waits at the edge while the steward surveys the table. The runner's mouth twitches when he sees the pale loaves, maybe envy, maybe amusement at the way the rich drizzle honey, as if bees don't invoice the gods for every drop. You pass him a heel of white, still warm, because rules don't forbid kindness. They mostly ignore it. He blinks, then eats, eyes briefly closing in the same way the nobles did, which tells you the human mouth is a democracy after all. Historians still argue whether banquet scenes advertise real abundance or idealized wishful thinking. An afterlife trailer where bread never runs out, beer stays cool, and neighbors never borrow your quern and forget it for a month. You've carried enough trays to lean toward both. The record of a meal is always part diary, part prayer. A boy with a harp sidles closer and asks, with the boldness of someone under 12, whether the scarab breads actually prevent bad dreams. You answer, they remind good dreams where to land, and if that's not theology, it's something nearby. He giggles, plucks a string. A guest across the room raises a cup, crumbs on his lip, and calls for more music. Bread and sound fold together. Your hands smell of honey and flour and faint smoke that you swear is still stuck to your nails from the crocodile dung fires you've been trying not to mention at lunch. Joke 3. You promise yourself a new manicure called Soot and Sesame, trending never. A steward from the pantry beckons, storage. You follow down a cooler corridor, shelves lined with baskets, jars sealed with clay discs impressed by stamps that look like tiny stories. Fish, lotus, plow. He checks your surplus, sets aside what will be reheated at dusk, what will become staff meals tomorrow, what will go quietly to a shrine for a household ancestor. Bread moves in many circuits: public feast, private memory, practical breakfast. You tag each basket with a reed slip and picture the roots like canals. On your way out, a guest calls you over, one of those men whose voice fills whatever room he believes he owns. He asks about the whiteness, the softness, the how. You talk sieves and patience. He nods as if he might try it himself, which he won't, but maybe he'll pay better for those who do. Mainstream aside with both feet on the ground, bread here is wages. Fine flour costs time, tools, and hands. The pale loaf is a receipt for labor far from the shade of arbors. The music lifts, laughter answers, the steward waves you loose. You pass the threshold back into sun, where a woman with a reed basket waits for the cheap loaves from your second tray, dense barley rounds that will be breakfast and luck both. She thanks you as if you baked them just for her, which you did, though not by name. You watch her slip around into a cloth alongside onions and a little pot of salt. The sight lands in your chest like something right-sized, not a pyramid, not a pylon, just a lunch that will make someone walk easier. You step into the lane, baskets lighter, mind heavier, only in the way a scale is heavier when it finally balances. Pale loaves for painted rooms, dark rounds for sunburned faces, both honest, both needed, both rolling through the city like quiet planets. You adjust your grip, taste honey on your thumb you didn't know was there, and aim your feet back to the ovens where heat levels all hands, and the next batch doesn't care how important the last room was. Bread remembers the river, not the roof. You slip back through the lane with your empty trays and turn, not to the ovens, but to the low doorway painted with a blue ujat eye and a palm frond knot, the healer's room, where bread leaves its life as food and returns wearing a second job title. The air inside is cool and a little sweet, honey and beer and something medicinal that wants to be clean but still remembers mud. A mat holds bowls of ground herbs, a stack of linen strips, a jar of natron, and, waiting like retirees about to be rehired, yesterday's stale rounds. You put down the basket, crack a loaf with your thumbs, and the crust snaps obediently, crumbs cascading like pale sand. Bread's third act begins. You sort the crumbs the way a scribe sorts signs, fine for poultices, coarse for pills, heels for toasting into asterisks of flavor that hide bitterness. Mainstream anchor before your hands wander. The great medical papyri, Ebers, Hurst, Edwin Smith, read like long recipes where bread, beer, and honey show up so often they start to feel like staff physicians. Breadcrumbs bulk out boluses, make pastes cling, soften harsh essences. A toasted slice soaked in beer turns into a compress that holds warmth to a sore place without scalding it. You break, sift, and set aside, adopting a surgeon's neatness because the healer is watching you with the same look the master gives the oven. On the wall, a shelf holds the tiny buns you set aside last night, each stamped with an ujat eye, each the size of a thumbprint. quirky tidbit with a heartbeat. Families ask for these eye buns when a baby has a bad run of fright dreams or the house feels unlucky. One bun goes under the mat, one into broth for the anxious aunt who can't stop narrating disasters, one crumbled into oil to rub on a child's wrists, so the good dreams know where to land. The healer shrugs and says, "It feeds courage." You shrug back and label the bowl because courage needs a bin like everything else. You pound a little garlic with coriander and honey, drizzle beer until the paste loosens, and fold in warm crumbs. The scent lifts, sweet, sharp, friendly. This is for an old man's chest, a warming poultice to ease coughs when the Nile air turns tricky at dusk. The healer adds a palm of crushed carob and flashes you a grin that means, "Trust me." Historians still argue whether these mixtures worked by herb and heat alone, or whether bread's job was mostly logistical, keeping medicine where it's needed long enough to matter. You watch the paste hold together as though it remembers fingers and knows how to be held. Logistics can be holy when the breath catches. A woman arrives with a cut across her palm, bandaged in haste with a strip of skirt. You rinse with natron water, pat dry with lint, and press on a honeyed bread pad toasted to a gentle crunch, warm from a lamp flame. Honey's famous virtue is not a myth here. The healer nods. Sweetness is sterner than it looks. You wrap linen gently and tie the knot you learned from the priest who knows knots for doors and wrists alike. Joke one rises while you work. You tell the woman this is the luxury package. Pharaoh glow for hands. Comes with complimentary scolding if she lifts a basket before tomorrow. She laughs, which opens the stitch of pain and lets it breathe. On the next mat, a boy sits with an anxious mother. The boy's belly complains like a badly tuned sistrum. You toast a heel until it smells like the good part of morning, crumble it into warm beer, and stir until it turns to spoonable comfort. Mainstream reminder, simple and true. Beer in this world is food, liquid bread, lower in alcohol than you imagine, unharmed by boiling, safer than raw water when the gods feel mischievous. Bread returns to itself in the cup and asks the stomach to settle. You tip the bowl into the boy's hands. He sips, eyes narrowing at the faint bitterness, then softening as warmth spreads under his ribs. The healer gestures toward a covered bowl, the garlic and coriander scrap you folded with overripe starter last night. "For the poultice shelf," she says. You grin at Ra Eisen's second career. Historians still argue whether Egyptians knew anything about microbes beyond "this jar behaves if I treat it right," and whether the occasional instruction to use old bread on wounds hints at deliberate recruitment of the right molds. You don't claim penicillin, you claim pattern. Old bread sometimes helps, sometimes hurts, and the healer's nose, like yours with dough, can tell which is which 9 times out of 10. The 10th time, well, that's why prayers are a line item. A woman with milk-sore skin arrives, infant tucked like a scroll under her arm. The healer mixes crushed fig, a breath of cumin, and warm bread paste with oil, massaging it into linen squares that smell like gardens at sunset. Not too hot, she warns you. You test the compress on your own forearm, the same oracle you trust for dough temperature. The infant gurgles. You remember the boy who baptized his braid in the water jar and dubbed this moment a minor festival of relief. Joke 2 floats in when the infant sneezes, and you whisper to the mother he approves the seasoning, earning you a glare that melts into a laugh. On a sideboard sits a strange kit, a tiny mold shaped like an ear, another like a foot. You raise an eyebrow. The healer shrugs, a little embarrassed, and admits that on certain days, people bring tiny votive bits, wax, clay, even bread, shaped like the thing that hurts. They leave them at a shrine to Imhotep or another sympathetic listener. Bread is cheaper, she says, and mice can carry your troubles away. Historians still argue whether body part ex votos were common in our era or more a feature of later centuries in other tongues, but household practice goes where paperwork isn't invited. You press the ear mold into a scrap of dough anyway, because a child is watching and needs the comfort of seeing someone shape care into a thing. A messenger from the work gangs ducks in, scalp dusty with limestone powder. Blisters, he says, lifting a foot that looks like a map of all the distances he has walked. You toast dark crumbs hard as pebbles, grind them into powder with natron and oil, and stir until the paste is smooth enough to spread thin. Bread powders make a decent barrier. You learned it the day you invented apron on fire as a look. You wrap his foot with linen and tell him to come back at moonrise. He salutes with the gravity of a court official, accepts a plain round for the road, and vanishes, leaving a footprint in the dust you will sweep later. At the back shelf waits the day's strangest order, a charm loaf for a girl whose nightmares kept the whole lane awake. You shape a small disc, press the ujjat deep, and prick 7 holes around the rim with a reed. An old number, lucky or simply stern. Into each hole goes a sesame seed, because the family swears the tiny pops scare nightmares away when the loaf toasts on the hearth. Quirky fringe, your favorite kind, the seed song as exorcism. Does it work? The granary cat sneezes outside the door precisely then, which you take as a peer review of mixed methodology. Joke 3 taps your shoulder when the healer asks if you can make the charm loaf slightly more persuasive, and you offer to stamp the granary cat's paw if she can get the cat to cooperate. Exactly 3 people in this city can persuade that animal to do anything. You are not one of them. The healer settles for a neat crosshatch and a whispered line of nonsense that tastes like lullaby. Between patients, you line the bowls like a pantry chorus for cough, warm honeyed crumb, garlic, carob. For upset belly, beer mash with toasted heel. For wound, honey pad with crisped slice. For courage, eye buns steeped in milk. You label them with reed slips the scribe will roll his eyes at. He hates your handwriting, but you like the way the words look next to each other. Food words, healing words. The chant from the grinding circle returns under your breath without permission. Forward, back, fold, press, breathe. A priest drops by with a child's amulet, the one chosen at the temple, and asks you to warm one of the ankhs you set aside, touch it to the amulet, and send it home in a clean cloth. Bread as courier again. You do it with steady hands, remembering sesame blink like tiny stars, remembering the oven's hiss like a blessing you can measure. The priest thanks you without looking up. The child stares hard at the loop, decides the world will hold tonight, and grins. Before you leave, you crumble a last stale corner into the sweep pan. The healer saves even that, glues it with date paste into tiny pellets to hide bitter powders for stubborn patients who think all medicine should taste like figs. Mainstream truth, fully confessed, the first pharmacy trick is taste. Bread does diplomacy between tongue and cure. When the mat is swept and the bowl's covered, you step back into sun, fingers sticky with honey and a little natron, mouth tasting faintly of beer and garlic, heart steadier than when you walked in. Historians still argue whether what you've done in there deserves the name medicine by scroll standards, or whether it's just kitchen scents wrapped in linen. You don't argue. You carry your empty crumb bowl past the granary cat, who, in a staggering display of medical ethics, pretends not to want the last eye bun, and you aim yourself toward the ovens again. The city is hungry. The city is also wounded and worried and sleepy and hopeful. Bread doesn't choose between those jobs. Bread clocks in for all of them. You pivot from the healer's doorway and find the baskets already waiting, reed handles whispering against one another, loaves still warm enough to steam the cloths you've tucked over them. A runner from the works is there, calf muscles dusted the color of limestone, breath fast with the particular urgency that only very hungry people can inspire. You shoulder a basket, another rides your hip. The apprentice stacks a third on his head and tries to look casual about it. The lane tilts toward the river road, and you walk into a sun that bleaches every thought except don't drop the bread. The air smells like crushed grass, donkey sweat, and that familiar echo of smoke from the ovens. Remember that crocodile dung scent you keep promising not to think about? It still finds you like a punchline you didn't ask for. The road to the building site hums with carts and feet, a slow river of purpose. Men pass with poles of water jars slung on their shoulders, the clay sweating like anxious skin. Children dart along the edges with messages, whistles, and the kind of joy that comes from being allowed to carry any part of a pyramid day. You crest a rise, and there it is, the geometry that swallows all other plans. Blocks lie like giant loaves cooling in the sun, ramps snake upward, and the noise is steady, not a roar, but that continuous persuasion humans use on stone and on each other. On your left sits the workers' town, straight lanes, long barracks, kitchens that smell of mash and onion, bakery courtyards with domed ovens glowing like little captive suns. You feel at home the way a sparrow feels at home in a colonnade, small but correct. At the ration court, you slide your baskets onto a low table stained with years of crumbs. A foreman counts you in with a tally stick that clicks against a slate, and a scribe looks up from his tablet with the same narrow-eyed interest priests use on incense. Mainstream anchor spoken in the chalk-dry voice of bureaucracy. Pyramid crews get paid in kind. Bread and beer foremost, sometimes onions, garlic, and fish. Measures tracked in loaves and in jugs by volume. Measures like the hecat for grain. The math hums beneath the dust. How many loaves to a gang of 20? How much beer to keep them upright on a ramp? You open your cloths and the smell pushes a cheer through the line. A low, honest sound, like a chorus that forgot its words, but remembered the tune. The distribution starts with a rhythm you could keep with your eyes closed. You hand an ankh to a crew leader whose forearms look like the ropes he pulls. He checks the stamp burned into the crust, a barley ear today to match the sheet on the scribe's board, and nods. A boy darts forward with a net bag, and you aim around into it with a flick that would make your oven peel proud. The beer carriers arrive with their sloshing grace. Thick, malty, more spoonable than drinkable. The safe bread you sip. Someone jokes it's chewable river, and everyone grins because they've had worse. Joke one slides out of your mouth before you can stop it. 2 loaves and a jug, balanced diet. And the foreman, who has exactly one sense of humor he never uses, almost lets a corner of his mouth rise. You watch a man tear off a heel and soak it straight into the beer jar, the liquid darkening, the crumb turning soft, edible applause. He holds the soggy piece up to share with a friend who just set down a chisel. The friend shakes his head until you press a second heel into his hand with the kind of authority bread gives you. Across the court, smoke lifts from an onion pot, and your nose decides the official scent of effort is roasted allium plus warm grain plus limestone dust. Quirky tidbit, because the city runs on little rituals. A few work gangs swear by garlic rations as muscle charm. String a clove on a wrist, eat one at dusk, keep the aches from climbing inside the bones. Is it medicine, myth, or both? The garlic breath alone could frighten away a low-ranking demon. You support the program. Near the loading ramp, blocks glitter pale. On one, you spot red paint letters, graffiti, quick and proud. The crew name a scrawl that reads like a tavern sign. Friends of Khufu, or sometimes for Menkaur's work, something rowdier like the drunkards of Menkar. Workers write themselves into stone in the margins because foremen prefer tidy tablets. You grin. A pyramid is a monument to many kinds of handwriting. Historians still argue whether most of these hands belong to full-time specialists with steady rations or to seasonal corvée labor, farmers pulled in during the inundation lull. How voluntary the voluntary was, whether foreigners and enslaved people formed a significant portion, and how many tens of thousands the head counts should tally. The debate drones like summer insects. The bread line moves like a fact. A woman from the kitchen block brings a tray of barley rounds that look exactly like the ones you shaped last moon. You trade a few of your finer emmer loaves for her onion pot because mutual aid tastes better than ledger lines. The scribe looks away politely. He knows the official math, and he knows the math that keeps hands steady on ropes. Mainstream truth in every bowl. The machine only runs because the cooks and bakers keep it fed. Kitchen smoke braided in with quarry dust. Provisions crossing the yard as reliably as blocks cross the ramp. The foreman works the line like a brash river god, stamping reed tokens as men collect their shares. His tally stick taps in a rhythm your fingers echo on the basket rims. Talk, talk, talk. The same beat you used on the water jar, the oven lip, your own ribs. A boy who can't be more than 12 hugs a loaf as if it were a toy. The woman behind him, his mother, or the nearest approximation, clips his ear lightly, then splits the loaf and gives him first bite anyway. You make a note to send the child one of the eye buns if the nightmares in the barracks start making the nights noisy. Bread travels between rooms like advice. Someone in line asks, in the tone used for rumor that wants to be official, whether the big bosses eat the white loaves all the time. You answer honestly, sometimes yes, mostly no. The ranks here eat what you bring and what the kitchens stretch. Civ work costs time. Time is money, even when money is barley. Joke 2 pokes your ribs and you let it out. Yes, the foreman's bread is whiter because he never touches it. And the man wheezes a laugh that turns into 2 hiccups and a cough. You hand him a jug and tell him to drink like a god very slightly off duty. By midday, the baskets look like bowls emptied by saints. You pull the last round and the line's tail thins, leaving stragglers and the inevitable second helpings negotiators. The foreman squints at the sun, not a sundial, just the human habit of calling the light a clock, and calls a break. Men slouch into shade, loaves open like hinged shells in their hands. Some tuck a crust for later into the fold of a kilt, practical pockets being a technology the gods did not prioritize. 2 cats, cousins of your granary tyrant, materialize under the benches, auditioning silently for the crumb distribution committee. You pay them in crust and courage. You pass through the barracks lane to check the bakery annex here. The domes hum, smaller cousins to your own ovens, and the women treading dough in a great jar nod without slowing. One points to a cracked mold, and you promise a replacement from your potter. A pyramid with less personality this time. Historians still argue whether these on-site bakeries matched the scale of the big complexes closer to town or simply reheated and supplemented central deliveries. Your back votes for both. The system loves redundancy, the way every boatman loves a second rope. A messenger from the ramp jogs over, hand wrapped in linen, a smear of pink soaked through. Not gore, just work biting back. You detour to the shadow of a storage wall, pull a honeyed pad from your pouch, and wrap him again with the neat knot the healer approves. He tries not to stare at the loaf in your other hand. You press it into his good palm with the kind of authority that makes grown men accept kindness without inventing excuses. Then the argument comes, as inevitable as dust. A visiting overseer mutters, slaves, a local supervisor bristles, workers, and a scribe, desperate to be the reasonable one, says, laborers under obligation. You keep handing out bread because bread doesn't wait for vocabulary. Historians still argue whether the truth lives in any one of those words or sprawls across them. Compulsion braided with pay, skill seated next to season, pride elbow to elbow with sore knees. You've met men here who swagger like guildmasters and others who carry the river on their shoulders for a month, then go home to coax beans out of an obstinate field. The only label that matters to you at this exact second is hungry. And a half-minute later, fed. Joke 3 sneaks in when a block man, big as a door with a grin that could buoy a boat, holds up his loaf like a medal and asks whether the cat stamped it. You tell him the cat charges extra for branding. He says that's fair considering the quality control and breaks the loaf in half to share with the rope team that just wandered into the shade like tired ghosts. By afternoon, the court is mostly crumbs and rinsed jugs, the kind of quiet that isn't silence but satisfied rearrangement. You shake the last sesame from a cloth, and because the universe likes a callback, One seed lodges in your hair where it will ride until the priest points it out later with the same face he uses for missing commas on a tablet. You stack your baskets, roll your shoulders, and look once more at the geometry gnawing the horizon. Everyone who eats your bread today pushes that line a finger width higher. You're not laying stone, but you're persuading the day to hold together, and that's the same craft viewed from the kitchen door. On the walk back, the road feels downhill even where it isn't, the kind of trick a body plays when it knows the ovens are close. You promise yourself a heel dipped in beer before the next batch, a nap the length of a sistrum shake, and the small luxury of washing your hands in cool jar water until the flour ghosts lift. The apprentice asks whether he can tell the foreman his pun about ricin. You tell him no, the ramps are steep enough without men falling over from second-hand wordplay. Somewhere behind you the line forms again, different men, same hunger. You find your pace, match it to a chant you can't stop humming, and carry your empty baskets home to make them heavy again. You make it halfway back to the ovens before the city changes its breath. Drums roll down the lane like distant thunder. Reed flutes answer with a sound that feels like cool shade on hot stone. Someone has chalked a lotus on the pavement and scattered petals that stick to your sandals. A boy with a sistrum skitters by, and a woman balances a basket so high with bread that it looks less like groceries and more like architecture. You don't ask where she's going. Your feet already know, toward the river, where festivals turn hunger into choreography. By the quay, the world is 3 sizes bigger. Flags rise from boat prows, linen snapping. Priests carry the gods' bark on shoulders that never admit they're tired. Incense wobbles upward in threads, sweet and smoky, a cousin to your oven breath with better manners. Families cluster along the embankment, baskets lined with fresh cloth, and everywhere you look, bread is staging a friendly invasion. Rounds with comb marks like fish scales, tall cones lined in ranks, rings hung on pegs, scarabs glinting sesame in the sun. Someone laughs that they should build a causeway out of loaves and save the stone for the afterlife. You answer, deadpan, that your insurance doesn't cover acts of crumb. Joke 1. It gets a few groans. Perfect. The organizers, every festival has them, official or simply stubborn, have claimed a square of ground near the processional way and hammered in reeds to sketch a pyramid in rope. Inside this triangle, the bread climbs. You add your baskets to the human chain, passing loaves from forearm to forearm, building tiers. First, a base of sturdy barley rounds, good footing, then lighter emmer loaves, then the showpieces, ankhs, scarabs, little triangles that pretend to be mountains without filing for a permit. The pile rises until someone's grandmother declares it a respectable hill. You brush flour from your wrists and grin. If bread is a prayer, this is a chorus. Mainstream anchor humming under the cymbals. Egyptian festivals are food engines. At Opet, Amun sails from Karnak to Luxor and back, and the city eats as if the Nile itself has set a table. At the beautiful feast of the valley, families cross to visit their dead, picnic in tomb courtyards, and leave bread and beer so ancestors can join dinner the way wind joins a hymn. Offering lists on temple walls love to brag 1,000 bread, 1,000 beer. Formulaic but ambitious, a public promise that no one forgets. The phrase Hotep Dinesu, an offering given by the king, reads like a spell and a budget line, and today you're carrying both in your hands. The bread mountain gets a guardian, a Wadjet eye sketched in ochre on a reed banner, fluttering as if it knows envy has wings. Quirky tidbit lands with a sesame sprinkle. An auntie threads date pits on a string and drapes it around the heap. So sweetness watches the corners. Another ties a tiny amulet of Bez to the reed frame with a hair from the luckiest child she knows. You've seen bakeries embed a Bez face in the oven. Now you see him supervising an entire carbohydrate hill. The granary cat appears, obviously, positions herself at the base, and performs a sit that says, "Pess, kindly make poor choices." Historians still argue whether these public heaps are literal food stacks for redistribution or part stagecraft, part accounting, a visual thousand of bread built for the rite, photographed by memory, then whisked away mostly to temple staff. You've lived enough ledgers to suspect it's both. A spectacle with honest calories attached, a city's soft power flex that also fills bowls. The debate hums like flies. Speaking of which, the flies arrive with trumpets. Well, with legs and arrogance, which is the same thing. You and the other bakers fan with palm leaves, laugh, and then get practical. A ring of burning cones, kifi, and a less glamorous pinch of dried dung sends up a thin, cranky smoke that convinces the insects to file a change of address form. You can't stop a couple of bold pigeons from performing reconnaissance. A boy with a stick does that, flapping like a part-time ibis. Joke 2. You promote him to chief pigeon negotiator, and he puffs up so high his mother sighs loud enough to register on the nilometer. A priest marks the top tier with a loop of blue cloth, a sky token, and gestures for silence. The bark sways past, carried by shoulders that hide their pain the way a lamp hides its smoke. You bow with everyone else, and for a breath your baker brain switches off. When it returns, it notices the order of things. Breath, incense, bread. The priest breaks a single ankh at the peak, just the heel, and sets it on a small stone, a tiny altar on a hill of loaves. Then he nods to the stewards and steps back. The rope comes down. The city moves in. Distribution isn't chaos. It's choreography you could do by smell. Workers from the quays get first call, then older folk. Then the tide of families presses forward in a polite stampede. You pass rings to children, easier to carry, cones to those who can present a convincing case of too many mouths, rounds to anyone who looks like breakfast lasted a suspiciously long time ago. A scribe near the reed banner pretends to keep counts that will never reconcile because generosity smudges numbers on purpose. Mainstream truth that smells like coriander. Festival days blur the tidy line between temple stores and public belly. The gods eat essence, people eat evidence. A woman tucks a scarab loaf into a linen bag with onions and a sprig of mint. She's headed for a tomb courtyard across the river. The beautiful feast of the valley isn't just about priests. It's about families sitting where names are carved and saying them out loud between sips of beer. You picture your own grandparents, still breathing or not, gnawing happily at a comb-marked round and telling you to sit up straight. You slip the woman an extra ring for the way her mouth softened when she mentioned her mother. If kindness has a ledger, it lives in wrists, not tablets. Joke 3 pops like a sesame seed when a teen with perfumed head cone asks if piling bread into a mountain makes it taste better. You tell him, solemn as a vizier, altitude improves flavor, then stage whisper, but we're below sea level, so don't quote me. He laughs, his wax cone tilting, a drip threatening to baptize his eyebrow. He catches it with a napkin like a veteran. Between armfuls, you sneak a quick surveyor's glance. The heap shrinks at the edges, but still rises in a proud middle. The cat relocates to keep her supervisory geometry optimal. Two rival dogs circle with the diplomacy of minor officials. A drummer collapses into a grin mid-beat when an ant wedges a hot ring onto his finger like an edible signet, and he bites it off between rhythms. The air is a braid, incense, sweat, coriander, the faint minerality of the river, the caramel breath of date paste opening in the sun. You decide this is what we smells like. Historians still argue whether the 1,000 in offering texts is a literal shopping list, a poetic multiplier that stands for lots, or a bureaucratic dream invented by scribes who never counted bread in the sun. You handle your portion of infinity one loaf at a time and leave the zeros to people with shade and ink. What you know is that the rope falls, hands rise, and the hill turns into families carrying stories home. Someone starts a call and response near the river stairs, a song you know from grinding but with a skip in its step, and the crowd answers with its mouth full. You watch a father tear a heel and dip it into beer. He hands the second bite to a toddler who bites, then makes that face toddlers make when barley surprises them. The mother swaps for a piece from a sweeter coil, and the toddler's entire worldview becomes agreeable. You feel weirdly proud of a child you've never met. Toward late light, stewards lean into the pile to pull out the marked baskets reserved for the temple crew and the crews who kept the processional way clear. You recognize your own stamp on a few, a barley ear burned into crust, and it feels like finding your handwriting on the sky. A priest presses a small loaf into your palm in the casual, absolute way that says thanks without taking a breath. You don't argue. You break it and watch the steam leave like a gentle ghost. Pests make one more sortie at dusk. The smoke line nudges them back. A kite wheels overhead, drops a comment in bird that probably translates as, "Nice work. I'll handle quality control." The cat yawns so wide you can hear it and curls in the bread shadow as if claiming overtime. You tuck a stray ring onto the reed frame's hook for her, a bribe or a blessing. She pretends not to notice, then eats it without witnesses. When the rope space is finally just crumbs and a few proud stragglers, someone brings a jar of water and another of beer. You rinse your hands, splash your face, and drink, cool first, then malty, mouth grateful for each in its turn. The last cones ride off toward ancestors. The last rounds head for night shift guards. You hook your empty baskets on your forearm and feel the weight of a hill you just took apart in the right direction. The bark, returning, glows with lampfire. The sky turns the color of the oven's apricot heart before it goes to sleep. You remember the first ank of the day and the last heel you handed out and realize the whole festival has been one long loaf, mixed at dawn, proofed by procession, baked in sun, broken by many hands. You shake sesame from your hair, fail, and decide to leave it as a souvenir. The river breathes, the city burps politely. You point your sandals toward home, where flour waits to be convinced of tomorrow. You slip into the cool, low-breathed quiet where paint still glows after millennia, where a corridor's dust remembers names you're not supposed to say unless you're lighting a lamp. The air tastes like plaster and long sleep. Your footsteps soften as you pass scenes you've already lived today. Men grinding at querns, women turning dough, beehive ovens glowing the color of apricots. Only here the figures never tire, never cough, never wipe grit from their mouths. They work in eternity while you carry a lamp that hums like a moth. A side niche opens, and there they are, loaves tucked like secrets beside jars and linen bundles, shapes you could name by touch, cones, rounds, rings, even a small scarab that makes your hands ache with muscle memory. You lift one gently, and it is lighter than you expected. Desiccated to a hush, still holding a pattern, the baker pressed with a reed comb 1,000 dawns ago. Mainstream fact, steady as the painted grid under these scenes. Archaeologists really do find bread in tombs, carbonized or naturally dried, sometimes still showing finger dents, comb marks, and the ghost of seeds. Funerary inventories list bread and beer as foundational offerings. The Hotep Dai Nesu formula, an offering given by the king, 1,000 of bread, 1,000 of beer, runs like a chorus through stone. In some burials, wooden and clay models stand in for the feast, but real loaves traveled with the dead too, as if the afterlife might start with breakfast and good manners. A basket waits under a painted table, and when you ease back its linen, you find ring breads threaded on a reed, tiny moons strung like a necklace. Quirky tidbit that makes your chest tilt. Some grave sets include miniature bakery and brewery models, little men kneading, tiny ovens glowing in imagination, like the Middle Kingdom models people love to whisper about. Here, the deceased gets a perpetual kitchen, a staff that never calls in sick, a starter that never sulks. You remember your jar, raw icin, forgive the pun, and feel a ridiculous tug of jealousy for a culture that solved consistent fermentation with wooden puppets and belief. You set the basket down and trace the painted inscription with your eyes. A serving girl holds a cone loaf, arm extended with the precision of a scale. On the real shelf above, an actual cone sits, blackened on one face, as if it kissed the hot stone a heartbeat too long. You can still see the score you would have made to guide its rise, a shallow line that kept the top from tearing. You almost reach to test its hollow toque, but the tomb swallows your wrist with a polite cough that means, don't. You tap your own ribs instead. Talk, talk, talk. And the lamp winks, remembering the water jar's rim and the oven lip and all the taps that steadied your day. Historians still argue whether the food in tombs was meant to be eaten by priests and family during recurring rites, replaced on a schedule paid for by endowments, or whether much of it was symbolic provisioning. a single deposit meant to stand in for endless meals once the doors sealed. They also argue whether the black crusts you find were ritually charred on purpose as a way to fix the bread for eternity, or whether time and robbers and random accident did the toasting. Debates, like dough, rise when you give them warmth. You, meanwhile, see a comb line and know a human hand drew it for someone they didn't want to go hungry ever again. In a deeper niche, the air tightens around a sealed jar with a beeswax cap. You tilt your lamp and catch a faint sweetness, date and malt echoing up from clay. The urge to open it flares and then burns out under the invisible stare of every god on the wall. You take a breath and settle for reading the offering list scratched below. Bread, X many. Beer, X many. Onions, lettuce, fowl, and all good things. You remember the banquet's pale rounds, the workers' barley, the festival's bread mountain that pretended to be a hill until the city ate it. The afterlife has its own menu, but it borrows from your day. On a painted shelf sits a tiny loaf with 7 pricks around its rim. You grin despite the hush, 7 holes again, like the charm loaf for nightmares you made for the girl in the healer's room. Maybe someone else's mother begged, "Let the good dreams know where to land." Quirky fringe bleeds into the orthodox here. The tomb doesn't mind. A single sesame seed clings to the surface, fossilized wink. You brush at your hair, and predictably, another sesame falls out and refuses to confess which festival it came from. The gods of evidence smile. Further in, a relief shows a baker lifting a beja pan while a brewer skims foam, barm rising like river laughter. You think of the day you accepted a bowl from the brewer's boy and whispered, "For luck," more habit than heresy. The dead will need luck of their own. Tomb texts promise fields to plow and harvest forever, which sounds like a lot of work until you remember the models on the shelf. In this painted world, querns never grind down kneecaps, ovens never sting eyebrows, crocodile dung smoke never sneaks into lunch. Remember that perfume? And your manicure stays permanently soot and sesame without the soot. Joke 1. You consider opening a chain in the field of reeds, afterlife artisanal, where every loaf is heritage emmer and every customer tips in shabtis. You cancel the grand opening when you remember Shabti's work for the owner, not the staff. A low table bears a tray of little pyramids with crisp edges, the tidy cousins of your pyramid with personality. The crumb inside, if you could see it, would probably be tight as a promise. Someone arranged them in 2 neat rows and walked away forever. You stand in their place and breathe as if your lungs could turn into incense and finish the offering that a draft stole before the seal went on. Your lamp smokes, apologizes, steadies. The wall beside the table shows a scribe counting loaves, his reed lifted mid-scratch, ready to notch 1 more. He has been ready for a very long time. Mainstream footnote, whispered because the dead are listening. Tombs also preserve the tools, pottery molds, beja pans, dough scrapers, sometimes laid near the baskets or painted with gentle pride. In a few, you can spot actual grains embedded in old paste, emmer husk impressions fixed like fingerprints, which reminds you, on the underside of 1 ring loaf, You find a diagonal smear where a thumb slid, the print faint but there, a baker's signature written in skin's topography. You press your own thumb to your apron without thinking and leave a damp crescent you hope no one reads as theft. A little wooden bakery and brewery model perches on a shelf, men mid-need, women mid-pour, jars forever halfway to full. The tiny ovens are domed and smug. The querns are too small to hurt. Joke too. You imagine tapping the model's water jar. Talk, 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 just to watch the miniature baker nod solemnly and say, "Of course," in a voice the size of a sesame seed. You don't touch it. It moves anyway, but only in your head. Your lamp finds a painted line. Bread of the white table, bread of the great table. You think of the noble's pale cone and the worker's beer-soaked heel and realize the afterlife is trying to be both banquet and barracks without admitting the accounting. Historians still argue whether the white in tomb texts is precise, sieved elite flour, or ecstatic shorthand for best. You argue with your memory instead, filing that crumb you tore at the temple under good enough for a god and a scribe with opinions. Something rustles faintly, linen shifting as the room's temperature returns to what it was before you borrowed it for your breath. You bow your head because the courtesy costs nothing and buys a small calm. A painted woman offers a herringbone-marked round. You answer out loud before you catch yourself. It will keep. And for a strange moment you believe her answer. So will you. Joke 3 peeks out of the hush with terrible timing, and you smother it. No puns about raw icin in here. The acoustics are too honest. On your way back toward the door, you pass a narrow chamber with a stone table engraved in chessboard squares. The custodians call it an offering slab. Your hands call it a cutting board big enough to feed a festival. A shallow channel along the edge drains what meat leaves behind. The squares are staging lanes for bread and onions, a checkerboard for appetite. You imagine stacking ankhs along one file and scarabs in the next, and immediately picture the granary cat patrolling, tail high, eternally on staff. If paradise had payroll, she would be senior management. At the threshold, you stop one last time and listen. The tomb doesn't speak exactly. It hums the chord of grain ground by patient hands, water carried in sweating jars, starter stirred until it learns to rise even when nobody's watching. You think of the festival hill, the temple gate, the workers' court, the healer's mat, the noble's arbor, the way bread altered itself for each room without changing what it is. Here, it is promise preserved. Out there, it is promise spent. You lift the lamp as if to toast both. Sunlight pushes back the shadow as you step out. Heat snaps the chill off your skin. The day smells of dust and onions, and that eternal smoke note you pretend not to notice anymore. You carry nothing from the tomb except the shape of a comb mark and the idea that 1,000 of bread still means one loaf at a time. The cat is waiting where a cat always waits, exactly where you were about to put your foot. You apologize. She accepts in the ancient language of ignoring you completely. You head toward the ovens where a tray will be cooling and the evening will need a flavor to remember. You carry the last warm tray across the courtyard, and the glare softens until the light itself feels kneaded, stretched thin like a window of dough you can almost see through. Your steps slow. The smoke from the ovens coils outward, and in that rippling line, you glimpse something riding the air. Not just heat, but a bark sliding across sky, its prow lion bright, its hull gilded with morning. Ra's sunboat moves as if it has always known this alley, and because your hands are full of bread, the crew waves you aboard without ceremony. You climb, the deck warm as a fresh loaf, the river under you a ribbon of molten flour dusted with sesame stars. Don't shake your hair. You know how that ends. The boat noses up into daylight, over roofs, over palm tops, over the temple gate you can now look down upon without getting scolded. Priests look small from here, but bread on the offering tables reads perfectly. Ankhs in a quiet row, scarabs like glossy punctuation. The bark circles once, and the city answers with a smell you know by heart: grain, resin, river breath. Mainstream truth whispers in your ear with the tide. Every day the sun crosses the sky. Every night it sails the duat. Every morning is a victory. Every baking a small version of sunrise. The crew nods at your trays as if you've brought the proper fuel for this daily engine. Night unfurls beneath the hull, not dark so much as deep. The duat looks like a bakery after everyone leaves. Warm walls, distant hum, shelves of shadows stacked neatly with silence. You feel for your jar out of habit. Raw icin, still funny, don't say it. And find a bowl instead, wide as the moon and already dusted. Somewhere a sistrum trembles like a cooling rack. Knead, says a voice you can't place, the same calm register the master uses when the dough needs reminding. You pour in flour that isn't flour, star silt, cool and slippery, and a thread of water that tastes like all the wells you've tapped. Talk, 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 echoing along the boat's ribs. Your palms find their old orbit, push, fold, turn. The dough answers in constellations. Each stretch pulls a tiny galaxy longer. Each fold tucks a comet under. And the surface breathes like a cat when it turns into a loaf on the mat and pretends it doesn't like you. Joke 1. You wonder if Bastet accepts tips and crusts. A shadow tail flicks approval near the prow. All around you, other bakers appear in quiet pairs. Some you recognize from the grinding circle, some painted on tomb walls, who now look up from their beja pans and grin like old colleagues rediscovering the joke. Their bracelets clink like tiny bells. Their hands keep time with a chant no one starts and no one stops. You bank the dough in a trough carved into the deck. The sunboat has its own beehive ovens, domes smooth as shoulders. A little Bess face is pressed into the clay above the mouth, right where you'd have put him, his grin as fierce as a good crust. Quirky fringe slides across the planks like a mischievous breeze. A priestess sprinkles 7 sesame seeds in a ring around the oven base, so the stars remember their jobs. And because you are not in the business of arguing with successful cosmic scheduling, you pretend not to watch and then watch anyway. The journey folds open. Gates, guardians, hours marked by signs you could stamp into dough if you had all night and a better read. Sometimes the river goes underground. Sometimes it climbs a stair of light. Sometimes you drift along a corridor the color of dates, and sometimes you skim a lake so still it looks like a polished copper mirror laid on the world. "Feed them," says the voice again, softer, and you realize the crew is larger than you first counted. Farmers with hands like ropes, scribes with ink under their nails, dancers with head cones that never drip, even a brewer's boy who offers barm like an offering bowl. You press a heel into every palm, and in each face the same thing happens. For one breath, they look like the noble under the arbor, and the boy at the work court, and the priest at the gate, and the little girl who slept easier after an eye bun. Everyone's mouth is a kind of temple when it meets warm bread. Historians still argue whether the field of reeds promises labor without pain or leisure without hunger, whether you spend forever harvesting the perfect crop with tools that never raise blisters, or you simply arrive to find the baskets already full and the mats already laid. Up here, the answer feels pleasantly unnecessary. You knead because your hands are happiest doing it. You rest because the dough tells you to. The rhythm that once wore grooves into your bones now fits like a linen you forgot you owned. You slide the first cosmic loaf onto the stone. The hiss is exactly the hiss you love, a punctuation mark you could recognize in your sleep. Steam turning into a little speech about patience rewarded. Joke 2. You whisper to the oven, preheated to one sun, and immediately apologize to everyone on deck. The loaf lifts, opens where you gave it a door, and the crumb begins to build a city of tiny rooms. You pull it, break it, pass it. The crew eats with mouths open in gratitude and closed from relief. Even the crocodile down on the lower current, remember that smoke you swore you wouldn't think about? Seems to smile a bit less toothily when steam drifts down. The bark noses toward dawn again, prow warming from inside as if a coal had been tucked under the paint. You tuck a last ring on a peg by the mast and find your fingers tapping wood. Tuck, 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 just because. Joke 3. You tap the mast too and promote yourself to Assistant Sun Management, which is not a real title anywhere except exactly here. The sky unwraps apricot, your favorite oven color, and the boat descends gently until feet remember ground. You step off with flour on your wrists that refuses to blow away, the way certain songs refuse to stop humming once they discover your ribs. At your bench in the waking courtyard, the starter under linen fizzes exactly the way you left it. The cat performs a loaf beside it and sneezes out one last sesame star. You're back, of course, like you never left, except your shoulders sit an inch lighter and your hands move with the confidence of someone who has kneaded a night sky and watched it rise. You slow your breath and let each inhale widen, let each exhale lengthen, as if you are stretching soft dough and laying it down again in a smooth, shining fold. The ovens behind you fade from roar to whisper, and the courtyard light loosens at the edges, warm and easy, like honey slipping from a spoon. You set your palms flat on the board, feel the faint grain of wood under your skin, and imagine the last of the flour dust lifting away, drifting down like pale snow that melts before it touches the ground. The river, always nearby, hushes itself to a low, steady murmur. You listen for the old habit, talk, 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 and hear it return, not as a signal, not as a task, just as a gentle reassurance that rhythm still lives here, patient and unhurried. You picture the jars dozing against the wall, beads of water gone to sleep on their sides, the beehive domes settling into their own slow breathing, warm but no longer asking anything of you. Somewhere a reed comb lies quiet, its teeth no longer sketching herringbone on a crust, simply resting like a smile that has done its job and now softens. The molds, ankh, scarab, little pyramid with personality, nest into one another on the shelf, old friends leaning shoulder to shoulder. Even the scribe's tablet cools, the last number drying into place without needing to be checked again. You remember a small heel shared at the temple, a heel shared in the work court, a heel saved for a child who was listening for courage, and you let those little warmths stack one on another until they make a quiet hill in your chest. When the breeze moves, it carries coriander and clean clay and the lightest touch of sesame, so faint and friendly it feels like a hand on your shoulder saying, "Enough for today." You draw the linen over the starter, not to hide it, but to give it shade. You lean back, eyes half closed, and let the city's sounds blur into one long, kind note. In that soft distance, you can almost hear the sunboat slip its moorings again, and you smile without opening your eyes, because you know the way aboard, and you know you will sleep before it needs you. Good. Let it go. Let everything rise on its own for a while. Sweet dreams.